Hello friends and welcome to the first episode of Inspire. In this new world, we're going to go on a journey that pertains specifically to the art of building. It's been my biggest draw in the game of Minecraft for the better part of the past decade or so. And I've built a lot of things, most of them small and progressively better over the years. But I've never taken the time to sit down and really, truly hone in Minecraft. No pun intended. So within this new world, I want to go on an adventure with each and every one of you. We're going to learn together about all of the different techniques, all of the different bits and bobs and ways of thinking when it comes to becoming a better builder. As we make our way through this world and build it up slowly but surely, I don't want it to only be about the techniques and what blocks you're using and how you use them, but I also want it to be more focused on the art of it all. The way you think about it, the way you approach building, how you tie it to your memories and your experiences and to what you see, whether that's in the real world, whether that's other art, whether it's other creations in Minecraft. If you're anything like me, you've probably seen countless examples of builds over the years from people you know, people you may not know, people you may look up to. Things that wowed you, things that you thought to yourself, man, I could never do something like that. I've been that way for a while, and I think it's time to change that. So hopefully you can find some extra motivation in the fact that I'm not so much here to teach you as much as I am here right alongside you to learn as we go. So for the first time of hopefully a great many episodes, welcome to Inspire. So I'm gonna get working on some caving, getting some of the early stuff down. When you see me again, I will either have done something terribly wrong, or I'll be looking for a place to start settling down. Well, nothing has gone terribly wrong, nor have I found a place to settle down, but I have found right next to the surface this little skeleton spawner right here. And it looks like we're gonna get a name tag and a piece of horse armor. All we need now is a saddle and we can get going there as well. But I had to show you guys this because we are right next to the surface. You can see some of the surface light right there as well. And we're still right next to spawns. So wherever we get settled up around here, I think this is gonna be a great find. All right, we've made it out of the cave. I've got a shield, I've got a chest plate, and well, not much else, but you know what? That's all right. We got a lot of coal. I think this is just enough to get us started. And I wanted to show you guys a little bit of the area around us that we're working with. So I currently have my render distance up at 28 chunks, and we have some nice fog rolling in on the horizon as well. Now, there's not too much that I know about this world, other than that, for one, it is a large biomes world, and I think that'll serve our purposes very nicely. Alongside that, it is also one huge island, at least around here where we spawned in on the map. I did some very light vetting of some seeds just to make sure we found something that I think would give us a lot of room to operate and give us a pretty good baseline to go off of. So as you can see, we have this giant wide open kind of elevated plain right here, or I guess meadow. It's actually still just a plains biome apparently, but either way, it pretty much serves the same purpose. And we also have a bunch of plains around there. I believe this is what opens out to the ocean off in this distance, at least for this side of the island. We have a lot of these beaches kind of around the edges, and for the most part it's all plains and forest and flower forest on this island. I'm thinking it's probably a couple thousand blocks in each direction, so plenty of room to operate, plenty of room to work with. And it does, however, mean that when I need things like a desert or a swamp or you name whatever other biome here, we're gonna have to trek across the ocean to get there. The reason I wanted a world like this, especially a world with some large biomes and a nice wide open area to start with in the spawn of the world, is because the biggest thing that I feel I need to work on as a builder is scale. And not just scale, but also detail with scale as well. Something that I've done for years is just kind of build at player scale. And all that really means is, you know, builds that kind of fit the Minecraft character as a whole. You know, you're 2 blocks tall, so you kind of build something accordingly. You build something that you feel like you fit in nicely with. And that's something that I want to try and depart from. I want to learn how to build in a larger scale. I want to learn how to detail at a larger scale. And most of all, I want to learn how to start shading with blocks. So with all of that in mind, I was looking for a seed that I think would help us along that journey, give us a nice area to start out with. And I think we have a really good area here. Just by walking around and looking a little bit at everything. The actual world spawn, I think, was on that side of the river, just kind of over there. And at some point we can get a compass and we can figure out exactly where it is, mark it, and keep it safe. I feel like with where I'm at as a builder, I'm not in a position to be teaching anyone how to build anything. I think I've still got a lot of learning to do myself. And so the main premise of this series was not so much, hey, here's how we're gonna build this, but a little bit more so, hey, here's how other people are doing it, here's some inspiration, here's some other examples, and we're gonna try and figure this out together. Because at the end of the day, you guys aren't the only ones trying to learn some new techniques and how to build a little bit better, or just to see it all come together. But I'm also in that same boat. And so I think I've chosen a really good name for this series. Within the world of Inspire, that is quite literally what it's all about. We're going to go on this journey together. We're going to learn how to become better builders together, and hopefully by the end of it, should there be an end of it, or at the very least a month down the line, 3 months down the line, a year down the line, whatever it is, we can see a noticeable improvement in what we've done and how far we've made it. With that being said, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to find a spot that can be a little bit out of the way, somewhere around the spawn still, but somewhere where we can build a nice starter house, and that can kind of be our marker. You know, we started here, we'll put a little sign on it. This is how it began, and we can reference that at any point. I think that starter house is going to stay just as is, and we can always come back to that as kind of the beginning of this journey. Well, I took a little bit of a journey down the river. You can actually see where we were just in the fog up there in the distance where that tree is. And lo and behold, following the river, this started to appear in the distance. And you know what? That gave me a little bit of inspiration. This little, I don't even know, floating kind of jet out up on that hill. I think that right there might just serve as a perfect location for our little starter house, and that will give us the perfect opportunity to do some terraforming around it as well, to really exemplify, I hope that's the right word, what's going on right here, and make it look just that little bit better. But I think plopping something up on this hill right here in this weird kind of terrain formation and kind of leaning into the whole fantasy elements of it, I think could serve us really well and be a perfect little spot. Well, lo and behold, right next to where we are going to be building our house, there's a zombie dungeon right here too. Also really close to the surface. And hey, I guess I can't complain. We got some pumpkin seeds out of it too. I am out of food though, so I've done enough caving. We're up some more on some iron. There we go. So I can finally get some better stuff going. And now I think our biggest concern is going to be to start farming. Well, that's where we're set up for our house. And when we were over there, you may have noticed something in the background. And I came over here to investigate, and you are not going to believe this. We have this, maybe the wildest thing I have ever seen generate in this game. Just this little 1 block thick dirt patch. We've got 2 sheep, a big oak tree, about everything you would ever need right there, playing their own little version of Skyblock. That is unbelievable. That is honestly really cool. And I don't know how that kind of thing can still happen in modern day Minecraft. You used to see a lot more of that stuff, but I'm currently working on looking for a village. Aha! Ask and ye shall receive. That is not even like 10 seconds after I filmed that last little bit right over there by the tree. Looks like we chose the right direction to go, and this should get us started. We can also make sure that we keep the villagers safe here so that we can eventually start utilizing these guys for some of their trades and help us out just a little bit in that regard. Alright, I'll probably hang around here until nighttime rolls around, and then I can block some of these guys off inside of their buildings. Oh, this place is popping. Look at how many villagers there are. I can't believe it. There are so many of these guys sitting around here. If we can try and keep all of them safe, that'd be fantastic. Go ahead and block off these last 2, and I think we successfully saved everyone in the village. We're a hero. They're gonna owe us so much, and boy are they gonna work for it. So anyway, we could probably head back home. That was the only plot of land that they had here, so just carry. Oh wait, I did get a potato. I don't recall where I got that, unless it was from that field. There was no other fields, but you know what? We got everything we need, so we'll take it. Not too shabby. Back home we go. All right, we're back home now, or what will be home eventually before too long here. I've got a little bit of a farm going, got some animals corralled. Of course, there's still chickens we could get, but I'm not in a rush. A little bit of some crops going down here. It'll get us started as the sun begins to set once again. We've got a lot of material collecting to do to get this house done. I think the terraforming will come after. I'm not going to be too worried about that for now. Just going to go ahead and get the house in place, and then from there, we can start working through some terrain. First things first, though, we're going to need to find a mangrove forest, and we're going to need to find a desert. Well, I was in the middle of gathering things for the build, and I decided that I wanted some basalt. Well, I sure got it. I cannot believe what I am looking at for a nether spawn right now. I don't think in all of my days, not one single time, have I ever been done this dirty. Mojang, answer for this, please. I have no words. What am I supposed to do? I didn't even bring enough dirt for this. I can't even reach the nearest land. I didn't even think this was possible. You didn't think to, I don't know, spawn me in a cave nearby or just put me to the nearest surface? What is going on? And just look at this. Now I've got to get all the way back to my dirt bridge, and there are a million magma cubes. Thanks a lot. Worst seed I've ever seen. I want to go home now. Oh, we finally made it out of there. I'm getting rid of this portal, and I am moving it so far in any other direction that isn't right here. Also, for those of you guys wondering why I don't have any armor on, well, I do. Don't worry. I just got a fancy resource pack that turns it off so that you can see me a little bit better without... Oh, I'm over here. Without all of the armor. Yep, it's right here. I got all of this from all those ocean portals, ruin portals when I was in the ocean. Very good armor with protection. Very nice. Anyway, that's why there's no armor. Aha! Finally, our first little bit of building. It may not have seemed like too much for you guys, but it has been quite a while of gathering some resources and setting some things up here for us to really start to hammer this out. And before I got too far ahead of myself with the build here, I wanted to stop for a little bit and kind of check in with you guys and kind of walk you through a little bit of what's going on here, a little bit of what the idea is, and then some of the techniques that we're using, things that are new to me, and potentially new to you as well. You can hear a lot of villagers down there, just don't mind that. They are nice and well kept underground, and there is nothing shady or questionable about their living conditions underground. It's fine. Anyway, back to the build. So as I hinted at earlier, we found this little kind of natural jut out thing, a little floating piece of land, whatever we want to call it. And it gave me the idea. I kind of saw like an archway here, a little bit of that fantasy sort of terrain where, you know, it might not make a lot of sense in the real world, especially with a big old structure up on it. But I think with the right amount of terraforming, we can get this thing to look really cool. And especially if we start to tear out some of this terrain here. I set up a couple of these scaffolding towers for us to take a better look at it. And one of the things that I noticed while up on these two towers is first and foremost, this little hill right here that I have our stuff set up on temporarily, that's gotta go. But even more than that, I noticed when I was over with the house that I probably want to level out a lot of this terrain here. This hill kind of comes up right about where we're standing, and I think I want the view from kind of the river over there, and maybe even from that side of the river, you know, once the tree farms are gone. I think I want this to be a very nice view from over on that side, and I think we're going to have to do a whole lot of terrain work kind of building up to the house up on the hill right here, and this is just one side of it. Oh, the rain's here. Fortunately, I'm using the less intrusive rain from Vanilla Tweak, so hopefully it doesn't look too bad on the video bit, right? But regardless, this is only one side of it. Bit of a creeper farm down there. But I had mentioned that I wanted to stop before I got too far ahead of myself here, and that was to talk about a couple of the things that we're doing with the build. So the first thing that you guys might notice is a little bit of the shading that we have going on. So this is something that I've been talking a little bit about, something that I've never really done with blocks before, and something that I want to try to do more of. Up to this point, in pretty much all of my builds, the texturing has been very random and kind of chaotic. It's just grab a number of blocks and mix them all together and then call it good. And while that is better than just solid walls, I do think it's time to take that next step. And so that next step is starting to play around with lights and shadows, using blocks in sort of these chunks of blocks or these uninterrupted patches of blocks at a time. So as you can see, in some of the areas that we would consider darker areas, I'm using the smooth basalt as kind of our darker shaded block. And as we get a little bit lighter, we're transitioning into tough, and then cobblestone, finally regular stone, and then where there might be some lighter patches, places where the sun is really hitting a lot of the time, I even went ahead and threw some andesite in there. Now, we're definitely limited on our block selection this early in the game, so there was only so many things I would be willing to kind of play around with here. Deep slate definitely was not one of them. I did not feel like trying to gather a bunch of deep slate this early in the game, and even with the blocks we did get, especially those blast furnaces, I definitely bit off a little more than I could chew this early into a world, but hey, I do think it was pretty worth it. And the biggest thing with the shading here on the foundation of the house, and I think with most any build that you're gonna see this in, is that it's always better at a distance. I would say at a distance and probably at scale as well. So this right here, this is only the bottom layer of the house. This is just the foundation where we've kind of left off. Obviously up close, the closer you get and the more you zoom in on it, the weirder it can tend to look. However, when you get far enough away, such as from all the way back here, it all starts to blend together. You don't even realize that you're looking at a bunch of different blocks, and you get that shading effect to turn out really, really nicely. If you're just looking at it from this far away, and I can even zoom in and take this back just a little bit so it might be a little easier to see on the video, but you just see the lighting effect, right? Like if you look close enough, if you're really squinting, you can kind of see the different blocks, but at the end of the day, you're getting these different lights and these different shadows kind of happening in these areas where they should happen. And as we build the house up, and really any other build for that matter, we're gonna play around with this shading a lot. That is one of the most impactful things that we can do to improve our building from this point. And so it's something that I definitely want to incorporate, and I want to try to incorporate that in everything that we do here. The other big thing that you might notice is the use of blast furnaces as this sort of accent piece on top of our stone foundation all the way around the building. And yes, it's really expensive. Probably not worth it. Okay, it's pretty worth it. I mean, come on. It's a really good block when you're using the back of it right there. It works so nice to blend the lighter stone colors into kind of this little darker lip, this half block, this like half slab sort of detail. And you even get those little accent pieces right up in the corners of these blocks as well. Let me zoom in real far for you guys. These little pieces right here that can kind of look like almost these nails or other various accent pieces to the rest of the build that's going to go above. I thought it was the perfect block for this transition right here. And while it was extremely expensive, we do fortunately have iron farms at our disposal. And I got a quick little one right down there that's been helping me out with crafting all of these blast furnaces, because boy, is that an expensive recipe. And before we carry on with more of the build, I want to demonstrate what we're going to start to do with the walls. So the block palette that I wanted to go for here was a little bit like this. And again, we're going to be playing around with the shading a little bit. So for the majority of the walls of this house, we're going to be having this sandstone into birch and then sometimes stripped oak sort of palette. When it comes to the two woods, we're just going to use the stripped log versions. We're not going to mix in any planks. And as a little bit of a better example here, let me go ahead and add some of this so that you guys can sort of get the idea as to how that shading is going to work in various areas. We're going to end up having something that looks a little bit like this. In some of those darker areas on the house, you're going to see a little bit of the stripped oak wood right here, and hopefully you don't even really see it, and it kind of plays that trick on your eyes where it just looks like the different lights or shadows. As we get a little lighter, and for the base of the walls, we're going to be using this smooth sandstone. We'll use the regular sandstone and the stripped birch to kind of accent and help that transition fade. And I think this combination right here of blocks for the foundation, along with this combination right here for the walls, works really well off of one another. And finally, to wrap it all up, we are going to add this combination of colors at the very top to give it that nice little pop for the rooftop. I think all in all, this color palette, these 3 base color ranges, is going to work very, very well for this house. And I'm really excited to see some of the rest of it come together, especially given we've got more work to do after the house is complete. We got a whole weird cliff thing to terraform. So enough of me talking about it. It's time to get doing it. But first, I gotta sleep. Oh man, I think we have done it now. I just got a little glimpse of it. Let me get up on the platform right here. There it is. And I tell you what, I kind of knew what I wanted to go for here with this build. I kind of had the idea planned out and some of the techniques I wanted to use, but I think this turned out even better than I could have anticipated. And I think I have to say it, this is probably the best house that I have ever managed to build. I think a big part of it is some of the new techniques that we're using in there. There are some techniques I'm using in here as well that aren't necessarily new to me per se, but just mixing in some of the stuff I already knew with some of the new stuff that I'm trying out, and we wound up with something that looks really good. There are a couple instances of I'm missing a couple details. Like, I think I need some glass panes right there. I started to run out a little bit. And I think I put the campfires out in a panic up top and forgot that I kind of want the smoke to be up there. So I'm going to have to replace the campfires just a little bit, but that should be no problem. And walking around, getting some different views of the place, especially with how it's framed in your sight from multiple different angles, it being elevated up on this sort of hill that we're going to turn into a super fancy little terrain thing. You can see it from so far away in so many different areas, and it just comes into your view and just draws your eye to it so nicely. I think we've really managed to do something good. All of the time spent gathering some resources just for the first starter build, I think it was worth it. Going forward, it shouldn't have to take as long now that we're set up properly. But that all being said, I got some work to do, some windows that I still need to finish. I need to fix the campfires, and then the real fun starts. We got to start working on the terrain just a little bit, getting this all done up and customized, and then I think to cap it all off before we're done here, there is one final thing that I'm going to want to do. And maybe you've thought of it as well, but this spot right here to the right of the house, it looks like the perfect opportunity for a custom tree to kind of sprawl up and really accent the whole build as it all comes together. I think with a mix of kind of taking out some of this extra terrain, which will kind of draw your eye to this area better, especially the slope that it's on, get this all customized, get the shape looking a little better, and then plopping a tree right there. I think at that point, we will probably have set ourselves up with the perfect start to this world. But for now, I gotta fix up that house, and we gotta get going on the terrain. All right. And just like that, we have got a much better layout for us. And trust me, it only took like 5 minutes. All right, maybe it was closer to like 4 hours. But I mean, hey, look at how much better this place looks. And now with all of the adjustments out of the way for the terrain down here, it is very naked, very bare. We're gonna get to that, don't worry. But before we get to that, now it's time to shift our focus to where the house sits. And as you noticed, I haven't really touched it quite yet. This is where we're really gonna dive into kind of shaping it out a little bit better and giving it some of the detail that it deserves. Hey, future editing Cody here. I couldn't help but notice that I do this all the time at the end of talking clips. I just turn the camera, I just flick it in a random direction and start walking, as if future editing Cody doesn't have to sit here and deal with that, trying to cut a clip when I'm done talking, and then I just move the camera so it looks so jarring by the time I cut it. Anyway. Sorry you have to see that. I'm gonna do my best to not do that moving forward because wow, what a nightmare. Anyway, carry on. But first I wanted to mention something that I want to work on with building. We talked a little bit about the shading and some of the other techniques that we were mixing in there. Another one is sort of a picture frame technique, if you will. One of the more interesting things that I want to try comes from my favorite builder, B-Dubs, who is also my biggest inspiration. Somebody I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. And that technique is effectively looking at an area as if it were a picture. Whether that's a real picture or a drawing or any of the sort, you just kind of take a view and you turn it into a bit of a picture frame, and then you figure out how you want to detail it from there. So that can include things like sight lines, that can include things like depth, how close or far details are, how things interact with each other, what sort of things draw your eyes, what sort of things you don't really notice until you get closer, some things you notice better at a distance, all of that sort of stuff. And that's something that I definitely want to play around with in this world. And I think we'll see a lot more of it as we dive further into the world with some more of our projects later on. But I do think, given we have our house up on this little hill right here and we're about to shape it up nicely, we have a really good opportunity to play with it a little bit. The technique. Play with the technique a little bit. So here's kind of what I'm thinking with it. We know we want to put a tree on the other side of the house up on the elevated ridge right here. And as a part of that detail, we're going to extend this part of the stone out a little bit further. It's not going to come down and be an outward slope on this. It's not even going to all connect to the ground. Rather, it's going to come out a little bit and it's going to still have this sort of curve to it where the edges of it are definitely floating over the surface in a more fantasy way that doesn't really make a lot of sense in the real world. But that's not what we're going for here. We're going for something that looks cool, is attention grabbing, and gives you that sort of fantasy element. Whimsical even. So after we have that cliffside done, the tree will be the next thing. That tree will be a little bit bigger than the house. It's not something that I've built yet, but we'll figure it out as we go. We'll want the scale to feel good alongside the house, which itself is a larger scale than anything I usually build. So given we have the house up there and the tree right next to it, we have the fancy cliff it's going to be sitting on. I figure the pathway is going to wind down the hill a little bit and probably circle back around at some point down into this area, and then we can have it continue on that way, as well as maybe eventually do something out in that direction. But my main focus is going to be to bring that path down around here, have it swoosh across and head down that direction, kind of following the river right here. Hey, next day Cody here. I'm a liar. I lied to your face. We're not going to have the pathway go down there next to the river. That's a little silly. Why would we have the path run along the river on this side when not that long ago I was just talking about the view from the other side of the water? Not only that, but that's where I want to continue to do more of our building in the future, is on that side rather than where this normal forest is. So of course, it only makes sense that the pathway from the front door will wind itself down and eventually cross the water and then disappear off in that direction, and we can kind of detail everything up from there. So instead of all of the stuff that I just cut out there from last night when I was rambling on and on about this side of the river, nay, we're going to remove this big group of mangrove trees, which will also be very good for the mangrove stock. And I think in the future, we have a little bit of river terraforming to do, because as you can see from here, the view of the river is phenomenal. I do really like how wide the river is here. This is perfect, and you don't often get a river that looks this good in vanilla Minecraft. That being said, as it makes its turn right here, it narrows quite a bit into that traditional Minecraft wishy-washy, kind of really thin, weird-looking river that almost at times looks more like a creek than anything, which of course we don't want here. Now, I think all of the terraforming is going to be done on that side of the river. Once the trees are gone, it's kind of easier to visualize, but I think all of the water expansion, it'll be dug into that side rather than this side, especially because I just spent so much yesterday working on terraforming all of this down. I would hate to get rid of a bunch of it. But that's neither here nor there. The water and any potential bridge, that's not for now, that's for later. For right now, we have to detail this cliffside, get that looking good, and then we can cap it all off with our tree. And as I did with part of the house, I'm gonna show you guys a little bit of what I'm thinking of. And this is something that I have to do better about in previous series and YouTube videos. That's something I didn't do too well, is kind of lay out what we're gonna do ahead of time. And so we're gonna take right here a very, very classic terraforming palette, at least when it comes to exposed stone surfaces, things like cliff sides and mountains and overhangs and underhangs and all of the hangs. We have all of our different lighting bits right here, or at least we're going to play around with lighting. I should say we have all of our different stone bits that can kind of provide different lighting levels based on how you're looking at it. So of course, in our brightest side, we have things like andesite, which will go with the regular stone. I felt like that was kind of self-explanatory, so I didn't need to include it. But as we get a little bit darker, cobblestone, mossy cobblestone, tuff, and deep slate. I don't currently have regular silk touch deep slate. We'll make sure to get some. So I just put that cobbled deep slate there for reference, but that'll kind of give us our palette here that we're going to be using. And instead of doing what I would normally do in my builds, which is just use a random combination of maybe these first 3 blocks and call it a day, we're going to keep playing around with the lighting a little bit. And so you're going to start to see a lot more of the deep slate in some of these naturally shaded areas where we can kind of boost that shadow, really kind of hammer home that effect. And then in certain areas where the sun might shine a little bit brighter, you'll see it lighten all the way up into things like andesite, and of course the smooth stone will be there as well. Beyond the blocks that we're using, the most important thing is going to be the actual shape of this formation itself. And I think we have a little bit of work ahead of us to get it just right. I may need to do a lot of work down the side as well just to get it to a good spot. And something that I have been thinking about but not coming to any conclusions for is what we do underneath this overhang. At the current moment in time, there's not much down here. There is this big ravine kind of cave weird thing going on right here in the ground, which I'll probably just cover up if anything. I don't think it's really doing us much good right here. And when it's not lit up, it's just a mob farm underneath. I have considered things like water, you know, maybe a little pond down here or something, but I figured it would just be kind of shadowed. It would be so dark under there with the overhang kind of, you know, being right above it. I considered perhaps taking the tree that we build and using the roots of it, having them kind of shoot through the terrain on the bottom maybe, and have them do something cool. I'm not exactly sure. I feel like I'm on the precipice of a couple potentially good ideas, but nothing's really clicking. So I think for now, I'm not going to worry about what goes underneath. And maybe I'll just cut a little bit of it out just to give it some more spacing. But I think we'll worry about the formation itself, and I'll let all of you guys give me some ideas for what we can do underneath. Okay, I think I've talked your ear off enough. Let's see what we can do here. Well, if you're still here at this point, I want to mention that this is quite different from anything I have really tried before, and it has been a really, really long time in the works. I've spent countless hours on this. I've completely reshuffled my whole schedule to really put my all into this project, into this world, into this idea to really see it come to light. No pun intended. So by all means, if you're enjoying the video, if you've made it this far, please consider subscribing to the channel. It lets me know that you want more of this. Shoot, tell me in the comments if you like it. Tell me if you hate it. Tell me what I did good, what I did wrong. And I'm really excited to get more of this out there. I hope you guys are as well. But I just needed to throw that out there for a little bit, if I could speak. The sun's setting. It's getting dangerous. I gotta go. Yep. You know what? That is the angle right there. That is exactly what I was looking for. So, of course, up close, and the closer you get, it's not quite the same. But at a distance, and especially if you can get a little bit of that fog rolling in, what we have just created is unlike anything I've ever been able to manage before. And I choose this area over here, this big wide open field on this side of the river, very specifically. That's because this is where I eventually want your eyes to be focused from, the direction, the approach, I guess. This is going to be where we continue to work out the world, at least in the near future. And so as the road approaches from this side, this is really going to be the angle you have, minus this big mangrove swamp. It's like 18 trees in like 2 chunks. It's crazy. Anyway, don't mind that. If you can just cancel that out of your vision for a second. The house up on the hill, we've terraformed the little cliffside right here. I love the angle we have. Now, it's not perfect, and there are instances where I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh, I could do this differently, I could do that differently, you know, I could do this better, maybe I didn't do too good there. But at the end of the day, I mentioned it earlier, I think I want this build to really represent where I am as a builder right now, because this is going to be our baseline. This is going to be our milestone. You know, I'm going to come back in a week, I'm going to come back in a month, we're going to look back on this in a year, whatever the case is, and we're going to say, okay, you know, this is where I was as a builder. This was what I could manage. This was my best, you know, at this current point in time. This was the best thing that I have ever put out up to this point. And so we're using that kind of as a reference. So I can't keep going back and making tiny little changes and adjusting it and spending hours and hours trying to perfect it. I think we have it to a good point. I think I'm happy with it. And while I was working on it, while I was doing the terraforming and kind of taking a step back, looking at it from different angles and really just pondering what we're building and how we can really further that idea that we want it to turn into sort of a picture, right? A work of art. You are looking at a framed image on the wall, or you stumbled across, you know, a still frame image, a screenshot on Reddit, or whatever the case is, right? The idea that we want this to be, you know, from further back, ideally, this sort of snapshot in time where it's like an art piece, right? And so I think the idea to have the tree on the far edge of this overhang was a little ambitious, and I think we're going to scratch that. I think we're going to cancel that, and that makes me a liar yet again. However, it's okay. It'll be worth it, because I do think putting a tree up on this hill will be really nice, and we could even play around with the idea of putting a tree a little closer to the house, maybe a little bit more in the background. We could do something a little further back from where the house sits compared to where we stand right now. Something a little further back, nice and big, so that it accents the side of the house right there. And I think that in combination with the detail that draws your eye, right? The cliff that's kind of hanging over a lot of nothing right here. I think that would be the perfect way to accent what we've built here. All of that being said, I think I've gotten ahead of myself just a little bit with all of this talk of building a tree and trying to get that done as well. I have poured so many hours into this episode already, and if I keep going, it is going to wind up over an hour long. So I'm just going to show you guys what we did right here and talk a little bit about this shading technique, just like we did with the house. This is a little bit of using it in the terraforming, and I mentioned this a second ago, but up close, it's not really, you know, it's not something to look at. It's not really something to behold, but it's not supposed to be, right? The idea here is that we're building on a larger scale and with more of a focus from far away. I've always built on smaller scales. I've always built with a focus of it has to look good close up, but I've never done the inverse of that. I've never taken a step back and really just taken that opposite approach, that larger scale, more zoomed out, the sight lines of it, right? The art of it, the shading, all of that sort of stuff that I've been mentioning throughout the episode. So we took all of these different blocks from cobbled deep slate to regular deep slate, tough, mossy cobble, stone, and even andesite in some highlights right there. And a combination of sort of terraforming the shape, getting that curve just right, and then mixing in the dirt at the lip of it, and on the slopes right here, just a little bit of dirt where it feels like grass might be able to grow. If it's too steep, it wouldn't really make sense for grass or moss or whatever might be growing up there to really show. And so I was kind of selective with that as well. I mixed in some stone along the side. And best of all, I even did it on both sides as well. So over here, this was all one big hill. This took forever to kind of flatten out and grass over and everything. And it looks really bad, but bear with me. We'll get there. We'll get there. And so here's how it looks on the other side. We have this extra little lip. We have this long slope that kind of leads up to it. It's not perfect. It's, you know, it sticks out a little bit because we don't have the extra details. We don't have any trees or grass details or bushes or anything like that, but we will, all in due time. Trust the process. And for this first step of the process, I think we've got something that has turned out pretty good, all things considered. I've never had to do anything like this terraforming-wise, so from this side especially, it's not ideal. I like it better from the other side, and this is one of those imperfection things. Like, there's no such thing as perfection at the end of the day, but I'm always sitting here trying to change up little things, trying to find where I can improve, and that cycle can definitely spiral out of control if you're not careful. And so I think a part of this world, a part of this project will be sort of learning for myself as well when is a good time to continue improving, and when are times to just kind of take a step back and say, you know what, I did good. I did better than what I could have done a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, whatever the case. This is objectively better than most things I've done, and so that's a good starting point to continue to improve on from there, but it doesn't always have to be improving on the same exact thing by redoing it over and over and over. I think we've come a long way in this first episode. I think I have definitely one-upped myself as a builder, and that's kind of what I set out to do. We played around with a little bit of the shading technique, we played around with a larger scale, and the best part is the scale can only go up from here, because I think we could do a lot better on a little bit of a bigger scale as well, and the possibilities are really endless. And speaking of the endless possibilities, I'm gonna lay down the gauntlet for myself. Over the course of this world and whatever we get up to, I want to try and become one of the better builders in Minecraft. I think I'm far from it. I think I've got a lot to learn, but I think I can do it. So stick around. Let's see how far we can go. Oh boy, have I been busy since we were last here. I have a horse, for one, and he's very speedy, very quick. Don't have a name for him yet, and don't have a place for him. He's just gonna walk away, but that's all right. I don't have any leads, otherwise I'd tie him up. Anyway, as I was saying, I've been a little busy working on a bit of an interior. So welcome. There's not actually a name for it. It kind of sounded like I was gonna say there was a name for it, but there's not. Anyway, I've been super busy working on an interior pretty much ever since I put the last episode up. All of my time has gone into here, and this is the perfect time of day too. The sun is setting. It's a little rainy out, so it's kind of hard to tell, but from in this opening area there is one thing that I want to point out, and we're just going to sit here and look for just a moment, because pay attention to the light level. All right, you might have caught a glimpse of it just a second ago when I looked up, but the first trick that I use that I want to tell you guys about is using daylight in an area of an interior that has a lot of windows or natural light that should be pouring in. And so we're seeing the light level very, very subtly start to die out as the sun sets in the rain, cloudy, you know, dull sky, until it gets to this really nice, dark, cozy lit level, right? I'm currently playing on 30 brightness, so that's gonna play a part of it. But what I did was this opening here, this entryway, it has a couple of windows up top, just these two right here. And I put a trapdoor all the way above me because that's a roof to the exterior. And that way we get a little bit of sunlight in here so that when I sleep, for example, it'll be brighter in this room than it will be anywhere else in the house. Then you combine that with the various lanterns throughout, the candles that we have helping light everything up, and you got a really cool variation in light level. Anyway, that's the first trick. We're all about learning new tricks here and getting inspired. So there's one for you. All right, I'm gonna walk you through the whole house here so you guys can get the whole deal. But here's the entryway. I wanted something that felt really big and wide open and grand once you came into the house, and I think we really nailed that. One thing I'm trying to do a lot of is use wall blocks in walls. That's not something I've ever really utilized to its full potential. And so that's something that you guys should notice a good amount all throughout the build, is the use of wall blocks in the walls. I even used it kind of up as these lips right here as well. Of course you can use it as railings, but I wanted to get a little unique, try something a little fancy. I still don't know how sold I am on lecterns with the mangrove trapdoors. I don't know if I love it or don't like it or want to change it. I'm still kind of deciding on that. But regardless, we have our entryway. To the left, we have a fancy little enchanting room. Now, you're going to notice one thing that's out of place, and that's going to be the random hopper right here. This is just kind of my really silly note to self. I don't have any pottery stuff, any of the sherds, but when I do get them, I want to put a bunch of those fancy pots all around the house, and I don't have any, so I'm going to put hoppers, or I did put hoppers, in all of the spots where I want to put one of those big pots. And the reason I chose hoppers is because it's something silly. It's obviously not supposed to be there when you see hoppers laying around. So that'll be a good note to myself. Whenever I can get those, I'm going to go through the house and I'm going to replace all of those. That being said, we have our little enchanting area on the bottom floor. Through the rest of the area down here, if we go a little bit to the right, We have our little smelting room, little utility area right under the stairs. I put my stone cutter. Gotta have the classic smooth stones on either end so that you can slide your piece of stone or whatever through the blade. We've got some furnaces, blast furnaces, you know, the whole deal right there. Nothing too crazy. This is our storage for now. I decided to go with the cellar vibe, so we got a bunch of barrels on the wall. We got some empty shelves. We got some tripwire hooks to kind of represent taps. And best of all, right here, we have the very first pickaxe I made in this world, also known as green jello with powdered sugar. Don't ask, it's a long story. And by that I mean, it's not really a long story, but it was on my mind when I named it. Moving on, we've got the brewing room down here, this little brewing station, which only has one brewing stand. It's not, you know, it's not here for maximum efficiency. We're going for aesthetics, right? So it'll do. I don't really use potions, hardly ever, so I don't ever need to make any more than that. It's just a nice little tucked away room that you kind of have to step down to get into. I thought it was a nice little touch. And that, of course, wraps up the bottom floor down here. But because we got a busy day, let's get to the rest of the house here. So this little candle holder, this candlestick, there's a name for these. I don't know. You can yell at me in the comments about whatever the name for these are because I can't think of it for the life of me. But little candle holders with the copper lightning rods, and it looks really good. I got a couple of those throughout. You can see one right here. Obviously, we had one in the enchanting area. You see a couple more as we go. But back to the lighting that we were talking about a little bit earlier. You can see how dark I have the hallway right here. A big part of that is because it's nighttime out, right? You can see that outside right there. But I very intentionally went about trying to make sure that the light levels throughout the house were very dynamic. There are areas that are very bright, and there are areas that are a lot dimmer, and they're not spawnable, right? Always got to make sure about that. Ever since the update during Caves and Cliffs, in which they took the light level for mob spawns down to light level 0, you can get a lot more creative with the different light levels that you use. I tried to be very sparing with things like lanterns, because it's just a direct light source. It's pretty much the simplest lighting that you can use for an interior is to just put a lantern down somewhere. And obviously you're gonna have that from time to time, but I tried to avoid that where possible, or at least where I could come up with a way to. Of course, as we go, as we build more things throughout this world, we'll start to learn some more about how we can do lighting better, along with everything else. But we have reached the point in the house where we're at the kitchen, and the kitchen is definitely one of my favorite pieces. So there's a couple things to go over here. Firstly, this is kind of the main area of the kitchen that we really dressed up nice and good. We have some barrels up top. We got our fancy little stove set up right here with all of this fancy stuff. We have the auto crafters that we just got in the recent update, and that looks like a really good little fan or little smoke inhaler device above the thing. You know, don't want the smoke alarm to go off, so you turn this on and then the dog runs away because the dog doesn't like the sound. Anyway, over here next to the sink, I played around with the bamboo trap doors a little bit. I didn't want to just have like a crafting table against there. I never like having those fully exposed when it's meant to be like a proper decoration. And we used the bamboo downstairs. I'm not sold on it. We could swap that out. If you're thinking something else could look better here, by all means, let me know. But for the sink, I went with something different. Usually you go with a cauldron. However, I had the thought to use a hopper, and specifically a hopper that's connected to the wall back there. We just kind of place it against it. So the hopper doesn't touch the ground. It just kind of curves into the wall. I just felt like that would be a unique way to do a sink, just a little different, right? We didn't have to do that, but I just wanted to get a little creative, I guess. And look at this, great view as the sun is rising over the lake over there. Over here in the dining room, I went with this. I had never built chairs like this before, but I had seen this design done a number of times, and so I decided to give it a go. Just a door with a banner on it for some color, and then you can do, you know, your choice of slab and matching, or, you know, not matching signs on either side, and you get a nice little chair right here. It's a little bigger scale, right? I think for our build especially, this is really pushing it. In terms of scale, given the interior we're working with, this interior is still, at the end of the day, not as big of a scale as I would like to have my builds reach at some point, but we're just starting off. Of course, this is the first house in the world, and it's a journey. We're getting there slowly but surely. Pause. Okay, I know you saw it. That's 2 episodes in a row. Rewind the tape. Hold on, rewind, back we go. Back we go. What is this? I'm talking? I'm talking? Oh, what? I'm not even done talking. I'm not even, I haven't even stopped talking. Why? Why did I swerve the camera? Why am I like this? Why can't I be different? Moving on from the kitchen, we have this narrow little walkway that crosses over the main area right here that goes all the way up the building. We're gonna see this kind of balcony one more time as well. And again, not sold on the railing here, but we'll see what we can figure out. We come through here, we have some more cabinets up top using item frames with an oak slab and some spruce signs laid over top. Signs don't make item frames do the plop thing where they disappear or, you know, get hit off of the blocks. So this is a good way that you can do drawers. You can even use stairs if you want to have like a fancy handle shape. You can use stairs. You can use all kinds of stuff and really get creative with that. And it's not something I've ever really used in building up to this point. I've seen people do it and I love when people do it. I think it's a nice detail. And I'm finally getting on that train as well. I decided to sprinkle in a little bit of color through some carpet through the walkway. I didn't do it everywhere because it would start to feel like it was a bit much if we did. Up in here, we just kind of have a lounge room. We have a nice little fireplace, a really tall plant. We got this little L-shaped seating arrangement, couch, sofa, chair, I don't know, whatever, however you want to interpret that. With some more shelves, we got some actual bookshelves around here now, and a great view out the window off in that direction, and surely in the future we'll have some stuff to look at through this window. But there's not too much to see in this room, pretty simple. Little closet underneath the next staircase right here, you can just kind of walk in. I use these wall blocks a lot as doorway pieces rather than using doors or trapdoors or arches even. Any of the doorways in which we used it on, it creates this really nice transition between rooms, especially for something like a little closet under the stairs or whatnot. Obviously, you can't close it off entirely with a door there, but I think it does the trick in a unique way. And as we go up a little bit, I made a little reading nook right here, so for all of you readers out there, you'll appreciate this little detail. We got a bunch of windows, some good views, little wraparound seating arrangement right here with some candles up on there and some bookshelves, of course. Another hopper that's gonna become a pot in the future once we get some sherds going. And the final balcony, you can start to see some of the roof blocks kind of coming out right there. I could detail this up. For now, I didn't, but let me know, would you prefer that we get like, I don't know, mangrove stairs and maybe shape that up a little bit? That's definitely something we can look at doing. Now, what we have right here, well, this is the best room in the whole house. Can anybody guess what we're looking at right here? If you guessed cat tower, you are absolutely correct. This room right here is going to be for cats. We're gonna get some cats. I don't know how many cats, but we're gonna get some cats and we're gonna put them in this room. And they have these fancy wool blocks and carpets and a big cat tower thing. It's a tower or a tree or a trower. Anyway, you get the idea. I just kind of went crazy with slabs and trapdoors and fences, and now we have a cat tree. So I'm gonna get some cats, gonna put them in this room. This is our cat room. Every good house needs a cat room, of course, clearly. And finally, up the stairs we go, we have our bedroom. It's nothing crazy, it's real simple. This window right here is where the sun rises in the morning, and so you wake up bright and early, you got the sun shining through this window to wake you up, it'll illuminate the whole place, that's kind of the idea, and so it works out really nice. I was gonna play around with doing the sort of bed frame that kind of comes up and over, but I really like how your eyes are drawn to this shape in the ceiling right here above the bed frame. I think it just works out really nice. It subtly gives you this really cool detail kind of up above where the bed is sitting. A lot more of the same details going around. A lot of potted plants around the place. That's just something I like to get crazy with and spam a little bit, and maybe I'll learn some better things to put around the house for decor instead of this eventually and have some better interiors, but it'll do for now. It'll do for now. This is our reference point moving forward. This is what we can do, and down the line we'll come back and see all of the things that we did that we do better at that time, all of the things that we hate in the future and what have you. Up here in the final couple of stairs, I haven't put anything. This is kind of the attic area. We have this little hallway right here that kind of goes to both sides, both windows, looking out the south and north directions. And then we have the actual attic up here. This is like the proper chest and barrel storage, cobwebs everywhere sort of area. So I haven't touched these areas, mostly because I don't know what I want to do with this very top floor, or 2 floors, depending on how you look at it. And I already did the rest of the interior. So I was gonna leave that part to you guys. We might think on it for a while, get some more ideas, and consider what to do up here. It's definitely not an area that we're gonna see all too much of, but we at least have all the walls set up and the ceilings in place and the floors, of course. So at least it's all enclosed and it wraps up the interior, structurally speaking, so that the house can feel properly done and like a house that we can and do live in. Interiors are always something that I have enjoyed building, but they're always part of the game that I have struggled a little bit with, just with trying to think of all of the different details that you can put inside of a build. And especially all of the little tricks that you can do with interiors, like scaffolding for shelves. This isn't something that I had ever used before. It's an ever-evolving process of just picking up on the tiniest little details, tiniest little things that you can do to make interiors look a certain way. And that'll be one thing that we definitely focus on trying to nail down from build to build. At least the builds that do have interiors, not all of them will. But as we go, we're going to keep it in mind, and that'll be on our list of things to try to pay attention to and learn. So we got the interior out of the way for the house, and that leaves the next glaring issue, and that is that we don't have a pathway that leads up to the house and sort of down this area right here. And once we do that, that's when we're really gonna get cracking on this episode with the moment you guys have all been waiting for, and that is, of course, the tree. Ah yes, the infamous tree, the tree I talked so much about in the last episode when we built this house and little cliff face. The amount of talk about the tree and the amount of cries and disappointment, the hearts that all simultaneously broke at the same time when I said that we weren't gonna put a tree here after all. Don't worry, do not worry, the tree is happening, and well, if you clicked on the video, you kind of spoiled it for yourself. But as of right now, it's not built, as you can see. That's something we gotta work on. So for all of you tree lovers, that includes myself, I do like a good tree. We gotta get that going, and that is going to be an absolutely massive undertaking. It's gonna require a lot of stuff. I'm gonna be chopping down a bunch of acacia. I'm gonna be mining out a lot of tuff, and then at some point, I am also going to need to do a crazy amount of leaf gathering as well. And unfortunately, none of the leaves I need are of that variety right there. I still gotta take that down. That is an eyesore. We'll get on that surely at some point. I probably won't. It's gonna stay there until I actually build something there, I swear. That's okay though. Back to the point. The point is, we gotta build the tree, but to build the tree, there's some terraforming that's needed here. So in my planning, with the size of the tree that we had, I didn't want to put it up on the hill because of the sight line that we're going for way back on that side of the river, right? That scaffolding right there sort of marks the picture frame that we're looking at. And as a matter of fact, if we stand up on this spot right here with the scaffolding and take a look at our picture frame, this is still in the way. I'll get to it, I swear. From standing right here, I can tell you that if I were to put it on the hill, it would get in the way of the house. Some of the tree foliage would start to kind of interfere with the roof. We would have to make them both work. They would start clashing. And so we don't want any of that to happen. The tree I'm building isn't tall enough to stand right next to the house and have all of its foliage and branches clear the roof of it. And so I played around with some different ideas. Where might we want to put the tree that would be best? And what I decided on was we're going to work on elevating a little bit of the terrain out front here. We're going to have a little bit of a raised section. It won't be like this. It'll be a little different. But it's going to be this sort of jut out that is raised up and then has some steep drop-offs on either side all the way around it. And at the very top of this little incline that'll sit not on that hill, but in front of it, so kind of down here, but at that height, if that makes sense. That is where we're going to put the tree. And by having it in front of the house, from where we're standing, probably 20 or so blocks, maybe a little bit more, closer to this point right here. Putting the tree there is going to allow us to build it in the scale that we have, and for it to fill out this part of the sky right here. And so with our picture frame, we're going to have the house on the cliff side over to the right here. We're going to have the tree raised up right here on top of its terrain over here. And then the canopy of the tree is going to start to fill out the sky a little bit right here. This is also going to play on perspective just a little bit. It's going to make the tree feel bigger than it actually is. Believe me when I say, this tree is big. We're just gonna make it look a little bigger. Nothing wrong with that. I think it's gonna make our little picture in this frame look that much better. And that's something that I encourage all of you guys to consider as well in really anything you build. Not necessarily making it a picture, right? I think it's a really cool technique to play with, but specifically perspective when it comes to what you're building in relation to what's around it, right? So in this instance for us, it's this tree. This tree is a big tree, but because of where we're putting it, we are making it look bigger than it is because we have the house and cliffside as a reference, right? Similarly, we could make it look smaller than it is. If I, for example, decided that I wanted to put it a little further out and really have the house be the focus and have the house look a little more prominent, we would make the house look even bigger than it is. And to bounce off of that, I would say that the cliffside actually makes the house feel bigger than it actually is as well, just with the way it sits up there. It's definitely something that you can apply to most anything you see already built or decide that you want to build yourself. Take a look at anything you've done or you've seen other people do and just consider the perspective element of it. How are the things around it affecting it? How is it affecting the things around it? Are certain builds or pieces of a build larger or smaller in appearance? Do they appear closer or further away depending on scale and proximity to other builds? It gets crazy. It gets out of control. It can snowball effect very quick, but it's a super, super interesting thing to pay attention to when it comes to building. But enough of that. I have actually talked your ear off for the past 20 minutes. So less talking, more doing. Hey, future editing Cody, why don't you make yourself useful and do that fancy time-lapse thing? Well, we've done it. And, you know, I think a little bit ago I was talking about how it wasn't going to be a repeat of what we did over there, but it ended up being a little bit closer than I expected. But hey, we'll chalk it up to the fact that it just kind of rhymes with the terrain right there, and it's just less of an overhang and more as if the rocks just came all the way down into the terrain right there. You could probably see it better if I decide to actually get this mangrove blob out of the way one of these days, but the terrain kind of swoops up and around up this hill, and it does something similar on the other side as well, where this hill continues down. It eventually swoops kind of up and around here. This rock face does extend around the front of it and then around the back just a little bit as it starts to merge with the swoop in the terrain on the farther end. Now, the biggest thing I'm trying to accomplish here is setting ourselves up for having the tree right about here in a way that it can start to raise up into the sky, and as we get to the canopy, it starts to set itself right over top of the roof of the house and then comes out over in this direction as well, so that we fill up this space right here to kind of paint more of our picture. Now, I did play around a lot with different placements for where we could put the tree and determined that what would look best is if it started at about this height and at about this far between us right now and where the house sits over on the hill. And so because of that, we needed to build the terrain around it so that it would work and kind of cooperate with what we were going for, at least given the tree that we're getting ready to build. And so rather than turning this entire area into one large hill, I decided what would be best is to do another little cliff face and have this hill on the back side along with the farther one that the house is on, both kind of merge up into this part right here, and then give it that kind of steep drop off right here. And that's important because we don't lose the shape of the terrain over here that, of course, we built the house on in the last episode. We really want that curve to be apparent. We really want to be able to see this detail from over here, given a couple reasons. For one, obviously, this is where we're looking at it from. This is sort of the snapshot of our picture frame, if you will. And of course, because we put so much time into making that shape so unique, we obviously don't want to lose out on that. And just like we did with the original cliff face up there, I used a mix of cobblestone into mossy cobblestone into tuff to kind of color the bottom of it, give it that shading so that towards the bottom it gets a little darker, and then up towards the top of the sides it gets a little bit lighter. I even have a little bit of andesite in the side right there. The one thing I didn't use is deep slate because there's no area that would be as dark as the darkest places underneath that one, and so I wanted to have a little bit of a difference there. And by not using deep slate in this cliffside right here, that one will always appear darker when you look at it versus how this one will appear, and I think that's good, given none of these areas are as devoid of sunlight as what you might find at the very bottom underneath where we have the house. So we've got the terrain ready to place the tree. The only thing that the terrain is lacking over here is the pathway leading up to the house, and then of course detailing all of this open plain right here. The area is devoid of any short grass or flowers or any detail whatsoever. That's something I'm kind of waiting on just a little bit. I want to get the tree done first. I want to get the roadway up to the house first, and then once we can see all of those in combination, I think I'll be ready to put some more detail into the surrounding terrain down here. But we've got our cliff face, we've got our hill for where the tree is going to go. I've been working a little bit on gathering some stuff to build the tree out of. I went a little overboard on the acacia and a little overboard on the tuff. I don't think we're going to end up using that much stuff, but all of this spruce will for the most part get used up, I do believe, with all of the different branches and whatnot. Another aspect of the tree that we're not going to get done right away is the foliage, the leaves, the canopy, if you will. That is going to be a process in a half to try and get done. I have a lot of leaf collecting to do. We're going to use a mix of spruce leaves, birch leaves, and also azalea leaves, and those ones are going to give me the hardest time, but at least it's not all azalea leaves, so that hopefully makes it a little bit better. But regardless, we have a tree to put into place. So now that I've painted the picture for you on what we're going to do here, why don't we get started on putting that tree in place? I think what we just did was the biggest change to this area yet. Now, there's a couple more things that you're going to see here from the clips just a moment ago. Of course, we have the tree in place, and that's all nice and good. But I went ahead and took the liberties as well to work on the roadway around the area as well. Just a little path. It meanders right down this way, curves around, and then sort of hugs the bottom of the hill over there. Something that I really wanted to bring the attention to as you walk through this area. At least from this direction, it kind of really helps sell the tree in the hill that it's on. You're definitely focusing on that a lot as you walk through here. And then from the other side, at least once you pass the hill, obviously you have the house to look forward to as you sort of traverse the pathway up and around. I've finally done it. I've finally gotten one over on recording, Cody. I can't believe it. Do you hear the quality of the mic and how it changed from the old clips to the new clips? I've done it. I've done it, and he can finally stop giving me grief. But I think even from the other approach as well, this is going to put a lot of emphasis on the tree and the hill that you walk around the base of right here, and that was very intentional. I didn't want the pathway to veer too far away from the features that we had made over here, and that was for the express purpose of bringing your attention to some of the things that we've built around here so far. Obviously, we're going to have some more stuff going on around here, but for now, I really wanted to focus on the things that we have in place at the moment. I've only built the pathway up to here, as I wasn't too sure what to do with it beyond this point, given we do have some potential future plans with the river right here, taking this part right here, widening it out to something similar to what we have going to the south, and then potentially expanding it all the way out to the ocean, which is just through this little gap right here. We're pretty close to the big open sea, so connecting it there could be a good play for us as well. Regardless, let's get up to our little standing point over here on the scaffolding and take a look at our picture frame. And there it is. We've got a little bit of fog rolling in on the house in the distance, but not too much, and we see the tree in the foreground right here. So I hope earlier on in the video I conveyed exactly what I was thinking, and even if it didn't quite click, you can surely see what we're going for here now. By putting that hill in place where we did, it allowed us to put the tree in a perfect position so that the branches over to the right side and soon to be foliage on those branches sits just above the house with enough of a gap that it doesn't obscure any of the house, and we've done enough to slowly fill out the sky around the house right there so that when we are on the approach from over on this side of the river, this is the view that we are greeted with. And I think we've gotten that down pretty well from the whole picture frame perspective, being that this is sort of our image right here, this is sort of our canvas and what we're trying to work with. I think this tree adds so much to what we have going on, and it's only going to get better from here. I've mentioned it a couple times before, but there's a couple other things I want to do on the hill long term. Maybe nothing as fancy or large as what we have going on with this tree, but I definitely want to add a couple more bits of intrigue. Perhaps a tree a little further back in the distance just to have kind of peeking up over the hills. Maybe another tree kind of up on the peak of the hill, something that wouldn't really take your eye away from this too much, so something a little simpler maybe. And then of course we shift our view over to the right side of the house and the tree, and we have this forest right here. Now that forest, that is going to be our focus in the next episode, so I don't want to divulge too much here, but let's just say I got a lot of wood chopping to do, and we are going to need all of the logs we get. We've got quite a lot of work cut out for us in the near future that I'm also really excited for. Back to the tree and what we just put together though, I want to go through a couple of things with you guys. Firstly, with the road that I put in place. I think for the scale that we're going for in this world, it was important not to get too crazy carried away with the pathway. Now, I've done a lot of pathways with a lot of different materials over the years in various builds that I've done. And typically, they're a lot more detailed than what we went for here. But again, given the scale that we're working on, we gotta be a little careful that we don't over-detail some of the smaller things that don't quite need it, especially when you have builds like this house on the hill, like this huge tree right here. Things that are gonna only get bigger or remain at this scale at the smallest. Things that take a lot of time and attention to detail, and things that you want your eyes to be drawn to. See, here's the thing. If we detail this road too much, your eyes are going to be taken away from the house. They're going to be taken away from the tree. They're going to be taken away from all of the other things that we do that are on a much larger and more important scale. So we've got the path blocks. I mixed in some oak slabs for wherever you need to step up. They match better than spruce does, and I've always used spruce before, but oak just seems to be a better play here. At least in this instance, I thought it would be a nice way to change it up. To go alongside that, along the edges, we have some coarse dirt patches, we have some packed mud patches, and of course we have some stripped jungle. That last one right there, that was something new that I tried to experiment with. I figured jungle wood would be a pretty close texture, but I didn't want to have any more of the plank texture since we already have it going on in the slabs right here. It felt like it might be a little too much, so I decided on the stripped jungle log, and a lot of the colors that we have right here are very close to this path block. It's like this desaturated greenish yellow sort of color, and then you get like these pinks, and those match a lot closer with the oak wood, for example, as well as the packed mud right here. And so it's a really nice block to kind of blend everything together. And while it's not a perfect transition block, I thought it was a nice little thing to just sprinkle in a little bit here and there in the road. And I think just like that, it's still a very simple road, nothing that takes your eye too far off of anything else that you want to be focusing on, but instead acts as a nice little supporting piece for this roadway. And I think we'll see a lot more of this style as we cross the river and make our way further into the world off in that direction. I also played around a little bit with some mossy patches and using some mossy carpets in those areas just for that tiny little bit of depth, that little tiny change in elevation where you can just see them poking up a little bit. It just adds that extra little detail among the grass so that it's not too much of the same thing on repeat. And the same idea was had with the ferns. We have a couple ferns sprinkled about. I don't have a ton, so I had to be a little sparing on where we use them, but I used the ferns as a nice way to add a different shade of green as well as a little bit of a different texture among the grass right here. So I tried to be particular with how I used it and where I put the ferns. You can see we have some various patches of tall grass where we also have some tall ferns sort of in that area. There's a little bit going on right here, and I started to run out of ferns a little bit. And then, of course, with the smaller versions, the ferns are sort of in splotches, just here and there amongst the grass, and it does a really good job at breaking up the grass. If you were to look at this area, for example, where I don't have any ferns, it's very easy to just kind of skip over it because of how similar it looks. It's all the same thing on repeat. But if you look at something like that, and then you shift your view to something like this, you can see just how much it adds to the place. It's such a small little detail, but getting that different shade of green through the ferns and even that different shape, it just helps that little bit. You don't even notice it most of the time, unless it were pointed out, like in this case, but it does a lot to just kind of help the detailing in a big field like this especially. There we go, it's getting a little dark, and while this place does look really good at night, I don't have any lighting out here, nor do I plan to, because at the end of the day, I don't care if a bunch of mobs are spawning here. We're going for a very specific look. This is going to be the definition of form over function, at least this part of the world right here. I think something that we could play around with is some lighting along the roadways at the very least, but it's not going to be functional in the sense that it spawn-proofs anything. It would just be for some ambient nighttime aesthetic. The last bit of detail that I did in the terrain is a little bit of these bushes that you see around. Pretty simple. I just tried to do some sort of light bush shape, nothing crazy. I didn't want them to be too big. I felt like them being closer to the ground would be good, so they're no higher than 2 blocks at any given point. And one thing that you're not really going to notice from as far back as on the road is that we use 2 different types of leaves in these bushes. We have oak leaves right here, and then we have some acacia leaves right here. And while they provide the same exact colors, they're just a little bit of a different shape in a way that gives the dark oak leaves a little bit more of this darker green, whereas the acacia leaves don't have as much of that dark color. And so as a result of that, it is the slightest little difference, but just enough that I put the oak leaves towards the center and underneath part of the bushes here, and then I tried to keep the acacia leaves on the outer edges and on top, just to play around with that shading effect that little bit more like we have been with everything we've done up to this point. And again, you're not really going to notice it too much from the path, but I like to think that it adds a little bit, so hey, we did it, it's staying, and we might do a little bit more of it as we go. We'll get to our fast horse right here, which we still need a name for, of course. By all means, drop some name suggestions for the horse if you have any. I've been good about naming everything so far in this world. We've got some good names for some of the tools here, just whatever's on my mind at the time. But to the elephant in the room, that is, of course, the tree right here. And so you're probably wondering a little bit about what we did here. It's a mix of tough and acacia logs for that gray color, as well as some oak and spruce for the brown colors. Now, trees are something I don't have a ton of experience with, and the trees that I do have experience with up to this point are primarily custom spruce trees, and even then, nothing quite on the scale of this. So a lot of this was a whole new experience for me and trying to figure it out as I go. It went through a couple different versions before I got to a state where I was pretty happy with it. At first, there were no fences whatsoever, and originally the branches were a little thicker, but it felt a little too thick on the branches, so I went through and we changed it to mostly slabs. There's some stairs, some trapdoors in there just to kind of help get shapes a certain way. And then eventually I decided that the fences would be good for the tiny little branches going every which way. Normally, I would avoid fences on trees smaller than this, but I think once we start getting to a scale like this, and even bigger potentially, it does sort of help to add that feeling of these smaller little branches going every which way, especially considering that our focus on these builds, at least up to this point, is not from close up, but instead, of course, from further away. And when you're further away like this and you start to play around with getting the fog on the horizon, and you're playing around with all these sight lines that are going to eventually have other builds that are a little bit closer, doing something like the fences on the tree right here are a perfect little touch, because back here, it looks infinitely better than it does up close. And I think a big part of that, of course, is the fences. That's the biggest difference here in terms of the look close up versus farther out. So just something to keep in mind with trees that you might be building on your own. The fences are usually something that you can kind of fall into the trap of using on any tree ever. But at least in my experience and up to this point, I think I like it better when it's for something that's at a distance and on a larger scale. As for the discolorations in the tree, that is a touch of detail that I had never really used before, but it was something that I recently had taken some notes on from watching some other builders start to incorporate it. This sort of gray color is actually something that's pretty close to a lot of real trees. If you were to go out and find some of the nearest trees to you, I guess depending on what trees there are, you're going to see colors that are a lot closer to this than they are to the actual oak wood color we have in the game. And especially once you zoom out, like we've been talking about, if I were to get up on this hill, as you get further away, the colors blend together really nice as well. They end up working together a lot better from back here than they do up close. And again, that is going to be a recurring theme with almost everything we do in this world. It's something new that I'm playing around with, but I do think it's a worthwhile thing to do because at the end of the day, as you build up a world, as you get more things put into it, most of the things that you see are going to be at a distance. If you consider this is our house right here where we have all of our storage for the foreseeable future, we're going to be building up things out in the distance over there. We're going to be building things out in the distance over here. We have this tree, which isn't that far away, but it's still not close up from where we are right now. If you picture what this world might look like a month down the line, 6 months down the line, a year, whatever it is, we're going to have so many things to look at from a distance as we enter or exit our house that naturally it becomes a case where most of the times we're seeing things, it's from afar, of course. And the same thing goes the other way around. As we're building all of these things out in the distance, we're going to start to see the tree and our house and the hill that it's on from a farther distance most of the time compared to right now when we're building it, and of course we see it all up close. Just another thing to keep in mind as you build up a world or decide on what you want to build and how you want to build it and how much of the shading effects you want to use, how it looks close up versus far away. I think that for me is going to be one of the more difficult challenges, is focusing on how a build looks farther away rather than it does close up, because as I've mentioned up to this point, I have spent all of my time building in Minecraft, the years that I've been playing, focusing on how a build looks close up and never really worrying about how it looked farther away. So it's one of those mental things that I've got to try and teach myself a little bit better, is focusing on farther away, focusing on shading, and not worrying too much, not overthinking how it looks close up. So there's your challenge for today. Try and do that yourself. Try to keep that in mind. How does it look from far away, rather than how does it look close up? But now that we've gotten the main build for the day out of the way, and I've kind of explained what's going on there, there's a little bit of some smaller things that I want to try and take care of that'll help us out long term. The first thing on that list is this skeleton spawner we found in the last episode. So grab some tools, because we got to get busy. And we've done it. Flawless execution. Nothing went wrong. Perfect. They'll be showing up any moment now. Aha! And now to reap the benefits. I don't have a sword. And now to reap the benefits. Flawless. And that's how it's done. So while we're down here, having completed the skeleton farm now and being able to collect some bones and arrows, not really that I need the arrows, but the bones are good for bone meal. I'm going to sit here and whack their feet a couple of times. I wanted to point out that I don't want this series to be strictly about building, at least not in the traditional sense. Of course, that's going to be the main focus. However, there's also another element that for me personally, I think I would have a lot of fun experimenting with, and that is, of course, redstone. Now, this contraption here required 0 redstone, but it is a part of the technical side of Minecraft. Now, the technical side of Minecraft is a side that I myself am not very familiar with. It's something that I've never gotten into over the years. However, as of recent, and especially playing on the one-shot SMP with all of the creators over there, a lot of them being technical players, I've learned a lot about how interesting that side of the game can be and how fun it can be to explore that side. This includes everything from farms to redstone contraptions to all sorts of things that require you to think really outside of the box to accomplish. Now, to add on to that, I don't want to just be another person who goes and picks out this person or that person's YouTube tutorial and build that exact farm or that exact contraption in our world. No, I actually want to try and challenge myself to come up with everything at least based on what I know up to that point and anything I can remember from the past. So what do I mean exactly by that? This contraption right here, I made completely off of memory based on previous mob farms I had made, which of course, you know, people had designed before, but it's become such common knowledge. I've done mob farms so many times now that I just naturally go to this design right here to make it happen. And I think most people do as well, right? So I want to expand that thought. Here is our very first example about the simplest thing that you can possibly do is take a mob spawner and turn it into a grinder like this. So I want to take that concept and I want to try to apply it to some other things as well. We're talking things as big as moss farms, things as little as a manual mud farm, things like a glow lichen or a vine setup. We're talking things like a creeper farm, things like farming sugarcane and a smelter and you name it, right? All of these different contraptions that I think would be useful for us, whether it's to gather certain blocks that we could build with, or are just useful generally speaking in the world. This is going to be something that I want to feature in these episodes alongside the fancy things that we build as well. A lot of the survival element has been behind the scenes, the trading with villagers, the breeding the villagers, going and gathering some better tools, mining for some ores, collecting mob drops, all of that sort of stuff, right? Gathering materials. I haven't really shown a lot of that on camera, and that is very intentional. I didn't want this to be a traditional Let's Play in that sense. I wanted to focus on some of the other elements of the game. So we take our fancy building that we've done up to this point in the series and we combine that with this challenge to myself to improve on the technical aspect of the game, but do it in a way where I force myself to figure it out without using other people's tutorials. I think that could be a really interesting way to learn the game. And it could also be a really effective way to learn how to get better at redstone and how to train my brain to think better when it comes to problem solving in this game. And problem solving generally speaking, I suppose as well. And would you look at that? We haven't even been here all that long and we've already got about a stack of bones, which is gonna go great for all of the grass that we got a bone meal. What a view this is right outside our front door. Hello, welcome back to Inspire. Feels like we were just here yesterday. Today, we gotta sleep. Today, we've got some work to do, but it's not gonna be in this area. Nay, today we switch our focus to the other side of this little field right over here. So most recently here in the world of Inspire, we got this hill built right here and we plopped this tree down right on top of it. And to boot, we went ahead and detailed up this field right here. We added some mossy patches, some bushes, and I took great care to pay attention to the detail of the grass mixed in with the ferns, and then having patches of too tall here and there, just to add that nice little touch, that subtle detail that you don't ever really notice unless it's pointed out. And I think we've got this area looking really good. At least on this side of the river, all of that over there is just temporary farming stuff, but this is really where our focus has been. Now, there are a couple of things that I want to get done today, and the first thing we need to do is we need to add some leaves to this tree that we built. I decided not to do it in the same episode that we built the tree, and that was mostly down to just how much we crammed into that episode, just how much we got done with the interior of the house. But I think today, the perfect way to start us off would be to get some leaves going on this tree so that we can really dive into the bigger project of this episode, which will have a lot less to do with this area here and a whole lot more to do with what we have up on the hillside over in this direction, and more specifically, where you see all of these trees just kind of lining up on the edge of this field. So if we stand up here at the base of the tree, we can see the house right here. We look over in this direction, we have a great view of the river that kind of curves off towards the ocean. When it comes to this forest right here, it's not very deep. There's a couple of rows of trees, and then you get another body of water over on that side. And then you have this big hill right here. The forest does go a little further back in that direction. And then over here we have a plains that just swoops around and continues on for quite a distance in that direction. Of course, back this way, the forest continues onward towards the world spawn. Those of you guys who have watched the episodes will know that we came from that direction when we spawned into the world. It's not too far off in that direction. We got to follow the river just a little bit. This is also the direction that we have our skeleton spawner in as well. But that's besides the point. Our focus is going to be on this group of trees right here. And more specifically, removing pretty much all of these trees that we can see in view, probably starting from maybe around here, all the way over to that body of water, and then coming all the way up the hill in this direction, and then swooping around this curve right here. Now, it's important to me that I keep in mind where this biome lies, and that's why I have some coarse dirt on me. I'm actually going to kind of outline it, not with a solid line, but I'm just going to dot some coarse dirt. And this coarse dirt is going to go all the way along the edge of where the forest is before we get rid of any of these trees right here, and that'll help me keep track of where the forest was by the time I get rid of all of the trees. Now, don't worry, I know what you're thinking. The trees are nice, trees are good, and they add a bunch to an area. So you might be thinking, why are we getting rid of all of these trees? Well, it's so that we can do the trees better. This tree is far from the only tree that we're going to be building after all. We've got some grand ambitions for this area over here, and what I want to do is I want to transform everywhere that this vanilla forest sits at the moment into our own custom forest to kind of work as a border to this area of the world. As a matter of fact, let me go stand on our scaffolding over there, which, by the looks of it, has a visitor. Yeah. Okay. If I could just stand right here, that'd be great if I could just, okay, so, yep. So, yep, okay, can I, okay, yep, okay. So like I was saying, if we take a look at our picture frame from over in this area of the world right here, you can see our house, you can see the big tree that's up on the hill right there, and then you've got a much better view of what the forest looks like at the moment with the river coming in from this way and then curving off to the side. Of course, I mentioned before that I do want to expand this river as well as it empties out into the ocean off yonder. That project will be much later on though. Our focus today, after we get some leaves on this tree to really finish this out and get it to its final state, we're going to remove this forest, we're going to turn it into a custom forest, and it's going to be a border. A border much like this river is right here. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of different areas that I sort of have in mind for this world based on where we've started. Right here, with our house and our big custom tree, including everywhere beyond it in this direction and over in this direction, so long as it's on this side of the river and this side of the forest, this is going to be our fantasy area. So everything I build over here is going to fall more in line with that fantasy theme. It's going to be kind of like the house we built. It's going to have that sort of vibe. The terrain's going to be kind of weird and wacky. And anything we do is going to fall more into that category, right? So the most obvious border is going to be the river right here, which does empty out into the ocean, and we'll make it even clearer in the future when we terraform it to make it look a little bit better. Everything on this side of the river where I'm currently standing, following the border of the river as it goes all the way down in this direction. Of course, we'll have a little bit of work to do to connect the river up with some of the rest of the water. But everything over on this side, this is going to be its own area, which I have an idea for, but I shall not give away yet. At least not until we get started over here. And then finally, we have the third area, and that's going to be marked by the forest. So we're going to have a forest of trees that starts somewhere around here and swoops all the way up where this forest goes and wraps around the corner. Everything over on that side of the forest is going to be the third area. And again, I will not divulge what that style will be over in that area until we get started with it. All we need to worry about for now is that we have our plan to have a couple different sections of the world, or at least of this area of the world, that sort of divide up different build styles. And that way we're not limiting ourselves to one or two different build styles, but we can really take the opportunity to focus on learning different styles across different genres of building. We're not limited to just fantasy, we're not limited to just trees, we're not limited to whatever it is, right? I really want to be able to cover the whole spectrum of building in this world, and I think this is going to be a great opportunity to make it happen. Now, the sun is setting, it's getting a little dark, but I did want to take the opportunity to show you guys what this place looks like at night. It is getting a little dark and the stars are getting up, but I hope it comes through on the video nicely. Just how cozy this place looks at night. Obviously, I don't have any lights anywhere but on the house, and then a little bit up on the hill right there. But I just love the atmosphere of this place, especially at night, and I thought it would be worth showing. But now that the nighttime's over, we can let all the mobs catch on fire and burn up. As a matter of fact, I have recently installed fresh animation, so you probably saw that a little bit on the horse and definitely with the zombie right there, but that'll be a nice little touch for this world as well. So now that we've got daytime back, enough rambling, we're gonna get to these trees, but before we get to these trees, we gotta get to the big tree. This thing needs some leaves. Well, what do you think? Yeah, me too. I think the leaves on this tree actually do quite a lot for the look we have here. I know a lot of you guys really like the tree without the leaves and just seeing the branches there, and I think in its own right, it did look really good seeing the branches and all of the little shapes that you could get, especially from a distance. That being said, I think the decision to add leaves to this tree was the right choice after all. I just feel like it does so much to kind of fill up this area and add that extra little touch of detail to the tree that I feel like it needed, and I think it works perfectly with the type of house that we built up on the hill over there. So I mentioned it in the comments on the last episode, but I didn't say it in the video. My inspiration for this tree right here was actually based on an American elm tree. I had a reference pulled up from just an image that I had found online of a real life version that I was kind of using as a reference point to just sort of see a little bit of how the branches were, a little bit of how the foliage looked, and all of those little details. Obviously, it's not perfect, and I kind of took some of my own liberties into some of the shapes and some of the different decisions that were made with the pathing of the branches and all of that sort of stuff, of course, because at the end of the day, this tree was tailored for this very specific purpose, to sit on this hill and to help frame the picture that includes our house. And of course, even though everything we're building here is meant to be seen at a distance, I gotta show you how it looks up close because it can look a little bit silly at times, especially from this angle right here. You definitely get some weird things happening with the branches, but at the end of the day, it's been a recurring theme through the episodes up to this point, but we're not focused on how things look up close, and more so from at a distance. It looks like I dropped some scaffolding up there, but that's gonna have to go ahead and despawn. One thing that I did really love about what this tree creates by being all the way up here, as the sun sets, this will provide some perfect lighting for what I want to show you guys, and it's right down here. Do you see this opening right here? It stands out really nice with the brightness level we have set at the moment at 30 brightness, but you can see this huge patch of light that's shining through the canopy, and I think that's a really cool effect to have on the pathway, the very same pathway that you'll be traveling to get to the house or back down to the rest of the world. Lighting is one of the things that we've really been spending a lot of time working on in this world, and I think this is another really cool example of it. As a matter of fact, I think we could get some sort of plant to put right here where the light shines the brightest, and then when we have the darker lighting surrounding this little spotlight, it can almost look like it's aiding a little bit of plant life, like a special flower that's starting to bloom in this area right here. I think that could be one of those tiny details that goes a long way. Now, in the daylight, it's still visible as well, and I do really love that. And it's not that this is any brighter, but it's more so that everywhere around is a little bit darker. If we stand on this patch of moss right here, you can see that there's a bunch of leaves overhead of where we're standing, and it does kind of make sense for where you might have the moss starting to grow. So that was a happy little accident right there. That definitely was not intended ahead of time, but we'll take it. And of course, you get a little bit more of this lighting effect the further down the road you go in this way. Obviously, you start to get free of the canopy up here, and then it starts to brighten up once again. But I think in combination with the hillside we have right here and the tree lingering over parts of the road, we've created a really cool effect with lighting. And hopefully it's not the last effect with lighting that we can create here. It's not just shading in blocks, but it's all sorts of different things, right? It's different colored leaves, it's the lighting based on the canopy way overhead and the road you're walking. All of these little details, all tied to lighting specifically, which can have so much impact on an area and so much impact on a build. If we come up to the base of the tree, though, up on this hill, it gives us a really good view of this forest out here, this vanilla Minecraft forest, and I guess flower forest is what it technically would be, at least this part over here. You can see our little iron farm that we have right there. That might get moved because it was just a temporary setup to get us some iron that I could use for things like minecart rails to get some villagers from the village that was way off in that direction. But all in all, I think it's time for us to shift our focus to this tree line right here and start tackling the next project in this world, which will be first and foremost to remove all of these trees and gather all of the resources. I'm going to try and save all the leaves and all the logs as well, of course. But beyond that, once we have it all removed, we are going to transform this into what I mentioned earlier, which is of course going to be one of our two borders that separates three distinct areas of this world. The river, of course, being the other border, separating the area we're at now from the area on the other side of the tree line, and of course the area on the other side of the river. But this forest can't be built until we take down what sits in its place currently, because these trees simply will not do. So it's time to get chopping. So get one good look at this area, and just like that, we are clear. Wait a second. Okay, much better. Now that we've got all of the trees cleared out up on this hillside right here, I went ahead and did a bunch of terraforming. I got rid of all of the flowers that were out in the open, and as you could probably tell, I did smooth over a lot of the terrain. I tried to keep the natural flow of everything in place, so it's still on a big hill, and we still have that elevated section right there as well. But I got rid of all the choppiness that is the vanilla terrain. There was a couple openings to some ravines and other caves and things of that sort, so I went ahead and filled those in as well. As you can see right here, we have our coarse dirt that's scattered across the top of the terrain, going right up over the hill and disappearing on the other side. In the back, you can see that I didn't quite get all of the trees. I only went up to a certain point, just to about where the hill starts to dive back down on the other side, and I went ahead and left everything else for the time being. That will all get cut out and replaced in the future, but I didn't think we needed to go that far to begin with. We already got plenty of room cut out for where we're going to start building up some more trees, and it should last us quite a while. So here's the fun part where I get to explain exactly what we're going to be doing with this forest and these trees, outside of course, it being one of our borders between the 3 different areas of this world. So the fun thing that I want to do with this set of trees up on this hill is that I want it to be a dynamic forest. The amount of trees in the forest is going to continue to grow higher and higher as more people join the community, and more specifically, I think what we'll do is we're going to tie each tree to a member of the Patreon. So in the past, we had uploaded videos about a day early for everyone on Patreon, but we've since switched to live watch parties every time an episode's ready to drop. So since the early uploads are off the table, I decided that we needed to do something else cool for the people who are going above and beyond and supporting the content on Patreon. And what cooler way than for each person to have their own dedicated tree in a forest of trees that's going to sit right over here, right next to where this world began. And I think the coolest part about it is that as more people come into the community and find the videos or find the stream or whatever the case is, and they join the Patreon as well, we could see more trees be sprouted up, each tied to an individual person, until we can fill out this forest bigger and bigger. So with the sun setting on this day, I think we're about ready to start planning where we're going to put all of the trees, and luckily I do have quite a few leaves from chopping all those trees down and making sure that I kept them all. So let's figure out where we want to put each tree. There we go. 26 trees for 26 members of the Patreon, at least at the time of making this video. So your first thought is probably, hey, that's a lot of trees considering it took you a whole episode just to build one. You would be right. However, Mama didn't raise no quitter. Well, there we have it. 23 trees, at least 23 for now. From over here, it doesn't quite look like it's that many. That's just with how the line of it kind of wraps its way up and around the hill there. And I made sure that the first trees that we would put in line were just going to border where this forest is going to be. So of course, it looks a little wonky in that it's just a straight line of trees and there's no depth to it. You go past 1 or 2 trees and all of a sudden you're into another field on the other side. That won't remain the case for long. As we get more people joining up, we'll add more trees, and as that happens, the forest will fill out slowly but surely up the hill in the background and then back down towards the water on the other side. And as a matter of fact, as it continues to expand, we'll even push it back further this way down the side of the river back towards the world spawn as well. I figure tying everyone on the Patreon to this idea right here is a really cool way to have a tie-in to a specific build, and a specific build that has a lot of room for expansion as well. Rather than just tying it to something simple like a couple signs inside of a single building or anything of that sort, this is something that feels a lot more a part of the world. And it gives this feeling that each and every one of you guys are sort of a part of the bones of this world, if that makes sense. You're a part of the life within it, each person having an individual tree. And as we go and more people join up, more and more trees sprouting up, each one representing its own person. I think that's a really cool idea, and I think it'll be really fun to see this forest expand as we go. Of course, that does mean in any random episode, no matter what we're working on, if there's more people to add, then I'll have to add it, and I'll make sure to include that in the video as well if there's any more that have to be added. But at least in this episode, it is one of the main focuses just because there were so many to put in place to begin with. And speaking of all the trees that we did have to put into place, I wanted to point out that we have a handful of different styles right here, and this isn't even everything that I had kind of come up with in a creative planning session. You'll see here about 4 different types, I do believe. We have some smaller, some larger, and there are even 2 larger than the largest ones you'll see here that I have not put into place yet. I'm gonna save those for as the forest expands a little bit bigger and we have some more depth to the trees. We'll have some more trees that are sort of centered in the forest area just a little bit better, and once we get a couple of trees in, that's where I'm going to start to put a couple more of the big ones in the backdrop. But since this is sort of the edge of the forest where it sort of trails off into the plains right here, I figured having a whole lot more of the smaller types out front would definitely be a good idea. Along with that, as we zoom in, you could see that we use different leaves for different various parts of the trees as well. So much like I showed you guys with the bushes before, and I may have even shown it with this tree right here up on the hill, it's a combination of 3 different leaves. The darkest areas have spruce leaves. You can maybe see a little bit of the bluish tint kind of down here, and that'll be where the sun is less likely to be hitting the leaves. And then it transitions to birch leaves, and birch leaves are the most common leaves you'll see in each one of these trees. Before finally, up at the very, very top of each of these trees, you'll get just a little bit of azalea leaves sprinkled in for that nice bright hue to kind of signify where the light is shining in on the trees most commonly. As these were built up, you guys saw a little bit of how I incorporated each tree being tied to a different person, but each one has a little hanging sign on it. Some of them were easier to do than others. All of these small trees that were only 1 wall thick, of course, needed a little jut out to hold the sign on it. And then each tree that was a little thicker, we could actually just put the hanging side to the edge of it. And I think that's a nice little touch, a nice little way to do it. I tried to experiment a little bit with different ideas with item frames and signs and all of that sort. And I think this is my favorite idea of all of them that I tested. It is a little noticeable from a distance, and sometimes it can kind of take your eye away a little bit. But I think as we get some more trees throughout, and especially once we get some kind of pathway going through the area, I think it'll be a really cool tie-in. And from up here on the hill, right underneath where the big tree is, you can see all 26 of our trees all lined up in a row right here, and it doesn't even cover the entire border of where this forest is going to be. We could only bring it up to there, and then it's got to kind of swoosh a little bit towards where the sun is rising in the east in that direction, before we really have the proper border of where this forest is going to sit. You can kind of see it a little bit in the grass color for the biome here as it makes its way all the way up, and of course, I don't have any grass in that area, so there's a pretty sharp cutoff of where I've bone mealed it and where I have not. But I think this is a really cool view to kind of see everything that we just put into place and to really see where more of it is going to be put as the days pass and each episode comes out, and slowly but surely as more and more people get added to the forest. That being done and out of the way though, you may have noticed something as I've been walking around. Right there in my hotbar, I have a set of wings. And that brings me to a couple of things that I wanted to mention or show you guys. First thing is that we just did our very first stream from this world. It's Friday as I speak, and in that stream, we went and found the stronghold and did some end raiding. So as I show you guys some moments from the dragon fight, as well as some of the adventures of looking for some shulker shells and some wings, I wanted to talk about something relating to the wings and also relating a little bit to the tools and mending and all of that sort of stuff. I'd mentioned it previously in some of the other episodes, but I haven't been showing too much of the survival element of the game, and I know some of you guys are a little curious as to how we're going to make some of it work. As a matter of fact, I've already seen 1 or 2 comments asking about how we're going to do certain things like that. So here's my idea for it all, and I apologize if it's a little hard to follow, but trust me and just do your best. For one, I am not going to be using mending on any of our tools in this world, and there's a very specific purpose. The first reason is that I want to be able to distinctly see the amount of tools that we have gone through over the course of working on whatever it is that we work on in this world. By not using mending, every time a tool needs to be repaired, it's going to cost XP. And every time you do that, it gets more expensive to repair it the next time. Eventually, it will get to the point where it says too expensive. At that point, you cannot heal that tool anymore. Well, since enchantments aren't really that hard to come by, nor really are diamonds to replace the tools with, I figure, why not make the second tool in that line or in that lineage, if you will? So whatever tool it is, we can call it Axe. We would move on to Axe 2, and then we would go through its lifespan until it's time for Axe 3. Onward and forward as you go, unless I break a tool. And if I break a tool, the most recent of its lineage kind of signifies how far I made it on that specific tool, at least the name I had for that tool, as a nice little indicator of how long I went before I accidentally broke a tool. That's something I struggle a lot with, is breaking tools on accident. So this could also help as a nice little way for me to train myself on getting better about not pushing durabilities too bad and keeping my eye on things like I should. As you guys have noticed, I've done some funny names for some of our tools. I mean, my Silk Touch pickaxe is called 1 Premium Taco Bell Mild Sauce. And so I think it could be a cool idea to rotate some names throughout all of our tools and armor as we go, and not just stick to one set of names for everything that we have. And that way we can kind of tie in some of your ideas as we go further and further into the world as well. So no mending on any of the tools for that express purpose. I think we can tie that into some of the empty rooms in the house as well. This ties back to some suggestions that I was getting from you guys. But in one of those areas, we can have a dedicated spot for our tool and armor progression, and more specifically, all of the lineages that will eventually come to an end from breaking tools, as a way to kind of look back on the past and see how far we got with, say, pickaxe lineage number 1 or axe lineage number 2 or whatever. Maybe we get some of those tools up to number 7, number 8, number 9 before we break one and have to retire that line into whatever little shrine or chest or barrel or however we do it in the house, whatever area we dedicate for that stuff, that we'll always be able to come back and look at. I think it'll be a really unique way to go about that sort of stuff. This kind of ties in a little bit to my plans for the elytra as well. So I have a set, and I think for the elytra specifically, I will keep mending on there just because that is probably the single hardest thing to go and get more of, and also because I won't be using elytra very often in this world. So anytime I need to go thousands of blocks for a specific material, if I need a specific biome, anything like that, of course, I'll be using elytra to get around. However, whenever I am around builds that we're working on in this world or areas that we have built up, I will specifically be avoiding elytra and sticking to horseback. And the reason for that is so that I can stay as grounded as possible in and around all of the things we work on. I think one of the biggest drawbacks to late game Minecraft is once you get elytra and you start flying around everywhere, you make the world seem so much smaller and insignificant compared to the times before you get those wings and that freedom of flight. By staying grounded and not using elytra in and around all of the builds you've done, you keep that perspective. Nothing feels like it's smaller than it should be. It doesn't feel like you just made the entire world so much smaller, but you keep everything feeling really, really large. And it helps to avoid everything you've built or are building from feeling a little distorted, going between being on ground or being up in the air, or even using things like FreeCam, which can kind of also have a similar effect as the elytra does. I just really like the idea of being kind of limited to eye level in all cases, and at best, maybe going and making a little scaffolding tower to get a better view of something. The way it just forces you to sort of keep everything in that perspective, I think is really valuable, especially in the context of a building world like this. Anyways, there's a couple of things that we need to get caught up on. First and foremost, I asked you guys in the last episode for some name suggestions for our horse. And I think of all of the name suggestions that we got, my favorite came during the premiere. I believe it was in the premiere, and it was the name Horse of Course. Now, live me does not remember off the top of my head who it was, but I'm gonna put up on the screen right about now who had suggested it. Well, what would we have here? Another instance of live Cody needing editing Cody to swoop in and save the day. Typical. And no, it wasn't from the premiere. It was from the first stream in this world that we were doing towards the end of it. It was Kaylandria, so credit Kaylandria to get credit for the name, of course, no pun intended. And I thought that was an incredible name for our horse, given what we have named all of our other tools, just being random thoughts that come to mind whenever we think of them. And as such, we can go ahead and name tag him right here. So we officially have Horse of Course. Now, to be fair, in full transparency, this is probably not our final horse, but he'll always be special because he's our first. There will come a time in the not so distant future where we get to some good old horse testing, because if we're going to be avoiding using elytra around here for the most part, we're going to need a horse that can go fast and a horse that can jump high. Now, Horse of Course can do both of those things pretty respectfully, but he's not the best in either one of them, so there's still some potential to be had. No matter what though, you can count on Horse of Course being safe at all times. We'll make sure to keep him around because he is indeed special. As long as he doesn't go suffocate in a 2x2 hole like Matt's horse did, that was a little unfortunate. Now, the other thing that I need to get caught up on is only something that you guys would know of if you are in our Discord. About a week and a half ago from the time of recording this, I went ahead and asked some of you guys in the community to submit some of the builds that you've done that you're proud of and would like to see showcased on this series. After all, this series is called Inspire, and it's about seeing and really taking in all of the different techniques and all of the different styles from various players across the community, not just from me myself or not just one specific style, but really being able to absorb everything and find inspirations from all kinds of places. And I figured what better way to do that than to be able to showcase some of the stuff that you guys create that you're proud of and would like to see make an appearance on the video. So we have a couple of submissions since I asked. The first one is from Hey Norm with this lovely little desert build on the water right here. And the first thing that I noticed was the custom cacti using the bamboo blocks. I would never have thought of that in a million years, and that detail is probably my favorite in this entire image. That is such a cool touch. I absolutely love the custom cacti. Overall, this is a really cute build, and I think it's a very nice take on a desert style build. I think this kind of thing would be perfect for like a desert village renovation. That's kind of the vibes I'm getting here. The next one I have to show you guys is this absolutely gargantuan cake. I want to say birthday cake. This is absolutely enormous from Miss Luna Joe. I think my favorite detail here is the use of the different colored glazed terracottas for all of these accent pieces around the edge, getting a good use out of every single one of them. Even that pesky magenta glazed terracotta. We actually have two images here that come in from Happy Stunt, who created a very cool scene in this first one with what I would guess to be some dinosaurs. To build on a scale like this and to still successfully do these organics, I think is really cool. I also love the trees that were put in here. They're very different from the usual custom trees that you might see. So points for creativity in that regard. If any of you guys watching have builds that you're proud of and would like to see featured on here, you can absolutely join in on the fun by being a part of our Discord. I'll make sure to have a link to all of our links as a whole down in the description below. And who knows, you might just see one of your builds featured in here on one of the upcoming episodes. Now that most of the aesthetic planning for this video has been done, there is something else that I want to get to, and that will involve sheep. Now, pardon how noisy it is in here. There's a lot of villagers, there's some bees, there's a lot of things going on, but I specifically have all of these sheep down here in a hole, and it's time to get these guys moved out so we can get some wool production going, specifically wool of every color. Using different colored wool in various builds as a form of texturing or shading is something that we're going to end up doing quite a lot of in this world. And so I feel like it's one of the more important things to get producing pretty quickly here. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, All of the redstone that we do in this world is just going to be us trying to figure it out. We're not going to be using any YouTube tutorials for other people's designs, and no matter how inefficient or bulky it is, I want to be able to figure it out on my own, utilizing knowledge from creating different people's designs in the past, as well as just what I understand about different blocks in the game and how they function. I feel like that's a fun way to kind of force yourself to learn a little bit about redstone and the more technical side of the game, of course. So we're going to give it a go with a sheep setup. All right, so I've made my way a little bit further out from where we've been working so far. As a matter of fact, we are on the other side of that forest border, which of course will extend all the way out here in due time. And this will be one of the two other areas of the world in terms of build style. Now, I'm still not yet going to reveal what the style will be over in this area. However, I do know that long term, I want whatever sheep setup we do to be in a build that we put out here in this specific style. So for now, I'm not going to worry about the build that goes up and around it, but more so get the functionality down so that in the future, when we're ready to actually do the whole build, we already have the functionality, we already have all the sheep, everything's set up and ready for something to be housed over top. Okay, so my idea for how we're going to do this, again, just based off of sheep farms I've done before and seen other people do, and then just trying to kind of apply what I know into trying to make a farm work, we're going to figure something out here. I'm thinking we'll probably do 32 different setups here. I'm thinking probably 2 of every color. And as a matter of fact, now that I'm thinking about it, we could probably even limit this down to like 16 individual pods with 2 sheep in each one. I almost wonder if that would be a better way to do it, especially to utilize less space overall. So I think we're going to go ahead and plan for 16 individual pods, and that might save us some materials as well. But I think we'll keep it pretty simple. We'll probably use a lot of glass like this and keep them in little pods like so. We definitely want to make sure that there is as many pieces of grass touching the base grass block as possible. Also, that is a fantastic sunset with the silhouette of our house in the background there. So if each of the colors contains 2 sheep in a pod like this, the first thing that we need to do is detect when the grass is eaten. And of course, the simplest way to do that would be with an observer. Now, since we want there to be as many pieces of grass around the base block as possible, I think I'm going to put the observer underneath the grass block facing up into it. Wait a minute. We need an output system. Well, this isn't going to work. Okay, so take 2. We have our pod right here. On this side of it, we are going to have our observer facing the grass block that is going to be changed. And now, just to make sure that we test that the signal works, again, change the state of the grass, and we're good. We're getting a signal. Very nice. Okay, so we have that outputting a signal. Now, I think we can just put a dispenser right on top of it, and we don't even need that for this to trigger the dispenser. So we can go ahead and plop something in here and go ahead and update the block. All right, so it would appear that we do need to power it. It may be a very simple solution. We could get it to power that block and then maybe just put a redstone dust right here. And then when we update the block in front, we get the output, and that could do the shears. So something really simple, just another block from the observer and then a dust on top. I wonder if I even need the redstone dust there in the first place for it to output, or if the block does enough. I think I do need the dust right there, but we're gonna try it. Yes, okay. So 1 redstone dust back here, and that's about as compact as we're gonna get for this style. So we have this set up. We're obviously gonna put something up top to keep the sheep in, maybe just a trap door right flush with the glass up there. And then we need to take care of the output as well. So what I'm thinking for that is that we are going to start with a normal hopper down here going into some form of storage. I like barrels because they're not entities and they lag a little bit less when in bulk. And we'll go ahead and get a minecart rail, and we'll put a minecart hopper on top of it so that it sits just high enough to pull anything through the full grass block. All right, we got our stuff. Rail and hopper minecart. Now, just to test it out, I'm gonna go ahead and throw something up top that gets pulled in. And one more thing I want to test is if we don't have a rail and we just have the minecart sitting like so, it does not pick anything up. So it's important that we have it on a rail so that it elevates it just high enough into this block so that it can pull things through the top. For any of you guys who are wondering, I totally knew that, of course, and it was just to demonstrate how it works. So with that in mind, that's kind of the repeatable pod that we're going to be doing here. About as bare bones, as simple as possible. There's surely way more efficient However, it works, and I didn't need to watch a tutorial. So we have it going into one barrel. We're going to actually feed this through a couple. Because I'm not using chests, we don't have as much storage as we would with a double chest. So I'm going to give this a couple buffers. And I think what I'll end up doing is I will have individual spots for each final output color-wise, rather than having it all feed into one big system where all of them are combined. You know, with the design we have in place and how far down we're going to keep this line of storage working, we're gonna push this up into the air just a little bit. Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. Instead of doing this for storage and keeping it pretty basic in early game, why not try my hand at doing something a little crazy and off the wall? So get rid of all of this. Also, yes, I realized what I had put in place right here with a barrel underneath a hopper, but without a hopper that would go into the barrel. It was a test. I was testing you to make sure that you would notice it. Anyway, get this fixed back to this state right here where we have everything outputting into here. Instead of going into barrels, we are going to have this output into a dropper. Now, when we get wool from the 2 sheep that will be up here, we'll go ahead and say that these are going to be the white sheep. When white wool gets sucked through the system right here and goes right into this here dropper, we're going to set it up so that it outputs the items into a water stream. Now that water stream is going to pick up all of the items from this module, the next module, the next module, all 16 modules. And as it goes through the water stream, it's all going to combine and funnel into our storage. So I know I just said that we weren't going to combine everything, but I changed my mind. And by having it go through a water stream, we can also have it go up a column and get itself a little higher in the air without having to build everything so far up. We can basically just item elevator everything through a bubble column. We can have it then go into a wall of barrels with hoppers on the back to fill everything up in a nice and compact fashion to where we don't have to do a whole line of hopper barrel, hopper barrel, hopper barrel just to avoid using double chests. So this does mean I am going to need to gather some ice and other such things that I did not prepare for here, but I think we can go ahead and save the stream for last and go ahead and just get all of these modules built up to this point right here with the addition of something to time our dropper output as well. So maybe we work on that real quick. And I think how we can do that is by using something called a comparator. Now the comparator reads what's in here, and I think all we need to do is we need to have it read whenever a single piece of wool is in here to then send a signal back to the dropper to then tell it to drop the item into the water stream. So I think the best way to do this would maybe be to have it facing like so. I believe that's how. Yes, you have to face it that way so that it reads what's in the dropper right there. You face it this way, you place it facing this way so that the double-pronged edge is facing the item that you want to read, the block that you want to look into. Could be a barrel, a dropper, anything like that. And now we have power going to the comparator. So now we need this to cycle back into this to make it shoot things out. Okay, so I've been messing around with this for a lot longer than I would like to admit, and I've decided to move the comparator up to read the hopper so that I could get a line of items that would trigger the dispenser on, or the dropper on the same line without having to go left or right. Now, it does work in theory. If we have one item in here and another item comes through here, it does spit that one item out. However, for those of you guys who know redstone better than I do, you will already know that if you have multiple items in here, it'll trigger once and it will stop triggering until there is no longer one item in the hopper because it outputs the same speed that it inputs, and so it's not going to continue to send a signal. That is a problem because we're gonna at times have multiple pieces of wool coming through and we don't want there to build up a backlog in the dropper. So I think it might be time to break out the pistons and observers. Okay, so here's where we're at. I have the classic push a piston with an observer into another observer, and then you get the constant observer ticks powering a target block that then powers the dropper. So it does work if I were to put 5 slabs in there. They all get shot out. There's a couple things right here. For one, I don't have any slime balls, so that needs to be a sticky piston before we are settling for the final state of things. For two, I, for the life of me, could not figure out how to get this signal to then double back underneath and then power this dropper from down below. I don't really understand how to make that constant tick go back and then travel upwards effectively without using anything to the left or right so that it would be perfectly tileable. And I think that's just going to be a limitation of my redstone knowledge as it stands at the moment, and something that I'll have to kind of pick up on in the future. By all means, for any of the redstone experts out there who know how to make a signal like that travel upwards, please let me know, because that would be some really useful information to have. But in the meantime, this does at the very least work, and with how we're going to tile it, it's not going to be such a perfect tile that this is going to be a problem. We'll be able to make this work all the way throughout. I just need to get at least 16 slime balls so that I can do that for each setup, have one piston doing this. And then once I have the materials, we can go ahead and repeat this 15 more times and then focus on doing the water stream into the storage. Another test. So I have a sticky piston here, but the astute viewers will know, of course, that without a repeater, it will simply do this, and that is weird and not normal. So the solution to our issue here is to push this back by 1 and then put a repeater between the comparator and the piston. And we're going to have a little bit of a delay on it so that once this triggers, it keeps those active until there's nothing going through this anymore. All right, I've got these moved, and then we'll go ahead and put a repeater right into there, and we'll give it a 1 tick delay and see if that's enough. Close. We can do better. 2 tick delay. And again, with 10 planks. 3 tick delay. Flawless. And just like that, we have figured it out. This is our perfect maximum efficiency, as compact as possible, sheep shearing redstone contraption, ready for some water flows. I will not be taking any arguments about making it more compact or more efficient. Now, I have 33 slime balls. Here's to hoping that it's enough, but I guess if we're only doing 16 modules and it only takes 1 sticky piston per, we should have plenty. So I think at this point we're ready to get 15 more of these modules laid out, and I think what I might do is I'll put 8 in a line here, and then on the other side, I'll probably mirror 8 more going down the same route as well. We can have them both empty from either side into one combined water stream, and that water stream can go into whatever storage we have for all of the wool in here. Why, yes, I did totally notice that I had 2 blocks stacked on top of each other, thusly not allowing anything to be pulled through the hopper right here. This was, of course, completely intentional design that I did not overlook one bit. It's a simple fix, really. I just need to move everything up by 1 block so that this is pulling from the actual grass block and I don't have this extra nonsense block right there. All right, I think I've got a setup here that's going to work very nicely for us. I did go ahead and try and compact it just a little bit when I mirrored it so that we would just have the nice little 1 block for our stream to go all the way through in this direction here. And I think I'll have it empty out over on this side and eventually go into wherever we put the storage. Now again, I want to have all of this in a future building that we're going to kind of erect around this setup right here, and so I think we're going to have the storage room on the back side over here. So we can take whatever water item flowing system we have, we can have it go over here, bubble column up, make its way out, and then kind of double back in this direction here on this side of kind of the redstone setup. And we can have our storage setup kind of line itself in front of all of this so that we could walk in from, say, this direction over here. We have the whole wall of all of the wool together in one big hodgepodge storage collection. It's not going to be sorted or anything, at least to start with. It'll just be a big wall of all kinds of different colored wool all mixed together. But again, we're not going to do the facade for this building until much later when we're ready to start working on this area of the world. For now, we just need to start cooking up the wool itself because I have a feeling we're going to be using a lot of it in builds going forward. I have run through and tested it though, so this setup has been mirrored all the way throughout. We've got 16 total nodes. I've made sure that any items that end up on the grass block up top are pulled through and dispensed out as they should be. So that's all good to go, and now we're ready to get our water item flowing thing going. And I have some ice, so I think the next thing I'm going to do is go and get a little bit of glow lichen to put in there as well. It was on this day that I realized I brought ice, not packed ice. Regret. Packed ice acquired, and now we can finally work on our item line here. So I think I'm going to put the item line a little bit lower down here so that whenever items get shot out of the dropper, they can hit the other wall and just kind of fall into the stream down below with hopefully not too much issue going on. We're going to have water flowing on top of the ice so that the items can move a little bit quicker as well. And of course, we're going to have it flowing in this direction. All right, so I've gone ahead and put the ice down. We've got the water flowing on top, and just for good measure, I put the glass up on the sides to fill any of these gaps 2 blocks high, and then of course you have the line down at the bottom, just so we can try and keep everything in here as well as possible. I went ahead and did a couple water flows intermixed by these glow lichen pieces, and with the ice keeping everything flowing, I think every item should make its way all the way down here without issue. Obviously, with the ice, as you can see, if I just stand here, you kind of keep your momentum a little bit with how you just kind of slip along the surface. And I think the same applies to items as well. And that's why you can get away with having the gaps between the water flows. Now, there's every chance in the world that I have no idea what I'm talking about here, and this doesn't work whatsoever. That being said, I have confidence this will work perfectly. So we have all of our items flowing into here. It's going to hit this last glow lichen and go into this bubble column. And now that I think about it, I think this needs to be a sign instead of a glow lichen. And that is so that we can still do water source blocks here without having it destroy the glow lichen down here. I think we can, of course, do a piece of glass right here, and that should be no issue. Though we might have some items get caught on top of it, so we may go ahead and just double up the signs right here, and I think we'll still be good to do water source blocks. So it's a little while later, and I think I've got something that I'm pretty happy with at the end of the day. So it's not perfect. I was experimenting a lot with the water flows and getting the items to do certain things, and this is what I ended up with. We got the bubble column, of course, that sends items up. And then we've got the water that sends it along its way over here. And then finally overtop the hoppers right here. Now, I went as far as to go like 6,000 blocks for a bunch of sea pickles, because I thought I would need those for like positioning items along here, just because I remember people doing that before. And I have no idea in what use case that would be, considering I just have water flowing along the hoppers here, and it seems to work well enough. I think it's probably, if anything, if I needed the items to go any further than one, water bucket worth of length, then I would probably need to have it continue on ice and then use blocks to position the items and then have hoppers in certain spots. However it is, I'm not too sure, but of course I'm trying to do all of this without watching a tutorial, so this is just based on trying to figure it out and then trying to use things I remember from other things that I've seen people do. All in all though, this is a perfect time for us to go ahead and test this, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab 16 redstone torches, and we have 16 different spots right here where we're gonna have some sheep sitting in there. So in theory, I'm gonna drop 1 torch in each spot. That'll be all 16 of them. They're going to feed through the system and wind up probably in that very first barrel, since they're not going to be enough to start filling up the rest of it. That's just kind of there for bulk storage. And so hopefully, if we've done all of this right, and I drop a torch in each one of these things here, we can see all the way down at the bottom that the torches are making their way through the water streams. It looks as though they are ending up in the bubble column and then onward, and they might have already all done that. So if we jump down below, we do indeed have 16 redstone torches, which means any wool that gets sheared from up in those areas will also end up down here. And of course, if there's enough of it, it might skip a hopper and go to the second row, or even if it fills up, it'll fill up from here all the way to here at the very last. It'll kind of go in reverse of how you might read a book, and that's just because I have it coming in from the right side instead of the left side, as well as the fact that we have the hopper set up like this, so the hopper below is going to take priority over the barrel. You can see how each hopper faces into a barrel. Now, it wants to go into the barrel, but if there's a hopper below, that is going to take precedence over putting it in the barrel, so the item would go in here. It'll go here before it goes there. It'll go here before it goes there, all the way down until it's at the final one, and then it'll finally go in. If that's full, this will fill that before it fills that barrel, and so on and so forth, right? So it goes from here up, and then here up, and of course sometimes we'll have a bunch at once, and that might skip over a hopper because of it, and that's where we might get some others filling some other barrels. Anyway, now that we've got this contraption set up with a little bit of a storage wall to boot, is officially time for the hard part, and that is to get all of those sheep into each of those pods. Ideally, 2 sheep in each pod, and each pod representing all 16 colors. Well, we've got the whole thing built. I've got all of the sheep in each of their individual chambers, and I've got them all dyed up. We know it's working. We can see, I think we heard a little bit of redstone go off just now. We can see a little bit of the wool make its way across the ice and into the storage system. That's all good and well. One thing I did have the thought about, though, is if I put grass up on these corners, could it spread diagonally to the block that the sheep are standing on, therefore allowing more instances of potential grass spreading, therefore speeding up the system as a whole? So I went ahead and went into my creative test world, and I set up one little chamber, and I only had grass on the diagonals outside of the glass. Lo and behold, it did spread to the dirt down there. So I think what I'm going to be doing is going around on each of these individual pods and adding this grass block just kind of elevated up and then out a diagonal for each of these chambers. And what this is going to do is give the maximum amount of potential grass spreading to the block that the sheep are on to, of course, keep that dirt block grass and therefore edible for the sheep as frequently or as often as possible. And just like that, we've got all the diagonals covered. And I think what this might also allow us to do is we could potentially breed up these sheep in each pen and go up to 3 or 4. Now, I don't know if we'll need to go that crazy and get that much wool production rolling. I guess if we end up, you know, planning out a build that has just oodles and oodles of wool blocks, then sure. But I think 2 in each module for now is probably plenty just for our purposes alone in this world. You could see a little bit of the wool going into the system right there. But overall, I think this is plenty good enough, and this should by all means do the trick. It's obviously a little bit bulky. I could probably have refined it down somehow, but at the end of the day, I accomplished what I set out to do here. I did not have to watch a tutorial for this. This is just using information from past farms that I've seen people build or that I have followed along with myself, and then whatever knowledge I have of the game and all of these redstone components, and trying to come up with a way to make it all work together. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that I was able to do that without having to be walked through how to set up something like this, and I was able to just kind of arrive there on my own. Obviously it took a lot longer than if I just loaded up a video and found the most efficient sheep farm. I could have done this a whole lot easier, but it is pretty rewarding to be able to do this all just based on being given the pieces but not really the directions per se, and then just kind of working with it until you figure out something. Today's the day. It's time to finally address the river situation that we have at the base of our pathway here. Something that I've hinted at for the first handful of episodes here in this series is that I want to do some work on the river. It empties out into the ocean off in that direction, and it goes all the way back towards spawn inland in that direction. And while it does both of those things, it doesn't do either one too effectively. As you can see over in this direction, we've got a couple of hills that are kind of blocking its pathway back towards that part of the island. And as it swoops in over in this direction, it gets very narrow right here. I've got only a couple of scaffolding as a little bridge across it before it tries to go out towards the ocean that way. And there's even some more parts down the way where it could be widened out quite a bit as well. And I think for the overall goal of what I want to do with this world, and especially in this area around where we've started to build up, getting this river to a state where I'm much happier with it is going to be super important before we can properly move on to building things over on this side of the river or continuing to focus on things on that side of the forest. One thing that I talked about when we built up this forest right here is that there are going to be 3 zones to this world, 3 different areas with distinct build styles. We obviously have our first area right here with our big tree and our house up on the hill. This is going to be our fantasy area, and then the other 2 I haven't specified yet. but we at least know where they're going to be. And the forest is one of the markers, one of the indicators or dividers, if you will, of these two areas. Everything on that side of the forest is going to represent one of the other areas. And then the river is our other border. So everything on this side of the river, for as far down as it expands back in that direction, and then maybe off to the left, everything over here is going to be its own area with its own unique build style. All of that being said, with our goal to build everything in this world on a larger scale than what I'm used to, and kind of play around with just larger scale building in general, that sort of line of thinking has to also apply to a lot of the terrain, whether it's terraforming or working on rivers or whatever the case might be. We don't want to have it to where we're only building really large things and keeping a lot of the terrain as it is, this sort of vanilla Minecraft style, which isn't necessarily bad per se, but would definitely feel a little out of place, or the other way around. The builds that we do could feel out of place if we don't adjust the terrain to what we need. So the first thing that I want to work on in this episode is I want to work on trying to plan out how we are going to make this river a little bit better. Well, I say plan out, but what I really mean by that is start to kind of dig out an area, or at least come up with some sort of outline for where I expand it and how wide I make it, as well as taking note of all of the areas that we need to adjust, such as the hills that way, or any gaps over in this direction where the river might not connect on its way out to the ocean. So I'm going to grab myself some wool from the sheep shearing station that we set up on the previous episode and use that to sort of dot along and outline what I want to do with our river. All right, I've taken to laying out all of the red wool, I've taken to laying out all of the red wool around this area here, and I was going to continue back towards the spawn region that way with the big hills we had there, but as I was laying out the wool in this direction, it did occur to me just how much terraforming is going to be needed, because we have a couple of these hills that are elevated quite a bit off of sea level, and specifically the one I'm standing on right here. Now, what this means is that it's not just going to be dirt and grass and sand that we're digging out, but we're also going to have to go through some stone and andesite and granite and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't have any beacons to do that in an effective manner. At least not yet, not this early into the world. That is something that I want to do shortly. I want to try and get taken care of, but there are some other things on the agenda first. So it's probably going to be a little bit before we get to that point. And what that means is that this alone, just going up to this bend right here, is going to be quite a project. It's going to require a lot of time and a lot of digging because of that. So I haven't laid out anything further into the spawn region over there, and I think for right now we're just going to focus on where the river's good and where it empties out this way into the ocean right there. And I think we'll kind of split the river into halves in that sense, where we'll focus on this and try to get this done now. And then we'll save that next part that kind of stretches further inland over there. We'll save that for in the future. So with all of that in mind, I think we can get started on getting this ready. So to get started, what I'm going to do is everywhere along where I've dotted the red wool, where it goes kind of up on these hills, is I'm just going to kind of follow the line I have. And I'm just going to dig these all the way down to wherever the surface level is. Maybe not necessarily water level, but I just want to even the terrain out for the most part. And it will look really weird. We're just going to have these hills chopped in half, but I'm going to save the terraforming and fixing of everything on the edges for after we at least get the full river in itself. So we're going to chop some hills in half. We're going to get rid of all of the grass and these flowers and trees and animals and clear the whole area out nice and good. And once I've done all of that, before I get to the bulk of it, which will be expanding the water, I'm actually going to leave the outlines of the river. It'll look a little something like this, where all along the edges of the river, I just kind of leave this one block gap so that I can dig out where we're going to have the riverbed itself. I can kind of lay all of that out nice and good without having to do all of that underwater. I can keep it from being submerged, which makes our job so much easier. And then in the final step, of course, that's when we'll have to flood the whole thing, which will also involve getting rid of these walls right here. And then we'll have to fix some of these blocks that raise up where the old riverbed met the old surface. That's enough rambling for me, though. I just wanted to kind of explain how I'm going to get all of this done. I think if we want any hopes of getting this river where I want it to be, we got to get started. So it's been a couple of days at this point, and countless hours have gone into the river, but I think it's been time well spent. We've got a lot of progress made on widening it out here. You'll notice a couple of things right off the bat. For number one, there's this little island in the middle of the river right here. This is kind of a natural formation that I decided to leave in place, just as a nice little area of intrigue. We're going to need a couple of those, especially because one of the other things you'll notice is that it's all just dirt under there, and so you lose a little bit of that vanilla Minecraft kind of patchiness where you'll get sand or clay or gravel kind of intermixed throughout the base of the river here. And I didn't want to go to that much effort in the expansion here to try to match that vanilla kind of feel to it. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to go collect a bunch of seagrass to plant around the area just to kind of make it feel a little more natural. But I think leaving it all as dirt for the most part will be totally fine. And I think for the shape of the river that we've got in place, this should work pretty well for us. One of the things that I do intend to do is build a bridge that goes across the river. But the biggest thing is that I wanted a river that felt like a river, not like a stream or a creek or so, but rather something that would require like a proper bridge build to go across, something that we could really kind of get creative with and make something cool out of on a little bit of a larger scale, right? So we've got that planned. That bridge will start from somewhere over here. I might even take this path a little up the hill and have the bridge kind of connect a little higher up and then shoot across. We might build up a little bit of a hill on that side for it to connect to as well before it kind of winds down into the rest of the area. And speaking of terraforming, there is quite a bit of terraforming that's still required along the edges. So I explained before that I was just going to kind of cut all of these hills in half right where we were going to do the river, and then from there we would kind of figure out the surface level stuff after the fact. So my idea for this area is, instead of taking each of these sheer cliff sides and just kind of flattening them out and then blending them with the terrain behind, what we're actually going to do is we're going to take the natural flow of the terrain that the world generated, and we're going to turn those into cliff faces in instances like this, or this right here. And then in areas where the terrain kind of swoops down to more of a normal level, we'll work with something that's more of kind of a natural blend where it just kind of comes right up to the side of the river. The river bank, that's the word I'm looking for. We'll make a little bit of a river bank situation over here. Something nice, something simple, not too crazy. And that way we can get a little bit of a mix of a bit of a subtle blend right here, and then some cool little cliff faces overhanging the river and kind of accenting it along the side as well. Something that looks a little bit like this, as a matter of fact, for the riverbank. Again, something really simple. And we can even see it a little better from over on this side as well. Each of these areas where it was just like one, maybe 2 blocks of a difference from the water level up to where the terrain met it. Something nice and simple to kind of blend those together, and that helps us see a little bit better all of the areas that we really need to hone in and focus on, such as this spot right here, or even where I'm standing as we speak. These are all of the areas that are going to get that special attention and focus into trying to turn into something that blends really nicely with both the river existing here and also the terrain that it's connected to outside of the river. And I think we've set ourselves up nicely with this cliff face right here that we've built our large tree upon. This can act as a nice little guide as to the styling and sort of detail that we want to put into any of these cliff sides that are right next to the river. I have right here a bunch of the blocks that we had used in those instances that should cover us pretty well for our uses here, and I want to go ahead and get started on those, but I'm not going to time lapse it. Instead, we're going to try and work on this a little bit together, so I'll try to walk you through a little bit as we go about it. So starting on the opposite side of the river, right over here underneath where we've got our tree, the first thing that I have in mind is that I want to start from the bottom up. I'm not sure how the top of this is going to turn out, or really what we're going to do with it. So for now, I'm just going to start down here where I kind of have a good idea as to how I want it to look. We're going to carve into this wall right here, start getting some of our darker blocks where it's going to be a little bit more shaded towards the center. And then out towards the edges, we'll get a little bit lighter, but not too light on the stone palette. And as we do that, I'll kind of work myself up a block. We'll see if there's any shaping that I want to try and do, and then we'll kind of go layer by layer. So we've got our first 2 layers in at the bottom with a little bit of the shading darker towards the center, and then a little bit lighter as we make our way out. Couple of highlights, a little bit of andesite right there, a little bit over there. And by doing the first 2 layers, I'm starting to feel like what we're going to do right here would benefit more from an overhang as opposed to a sheer cliff that kind of dips in a little bit towards the top. And to better explain what I mean, if we look at it from the side here, I think this would do better if the top of it kind of juts out over top the water, more so than if we just rounded this top edge a little bit, and then you are left with obviously a sheer cliff, but it kind of rounds out and it doesn't really overhang at all. Some of these areas might benefit a little bit better, specifically something like this right here, if we just round out the top a little bit and then have a little bit of a drop down to the water. And then other areas such as here and potentially even way up there are going to benefit from having an overhang instead. What this also does is rather than having everything kind of be one specific style, we get a little bit of variation in how the river blends with the neighboring terrain, whether it's the small riverbank here, whether it's an overhang cliff, whether it's a normal cliff face. Gives us all of these different options and all of these different things that we can do to make the place look as natural as possible. So if we get something pretty simple like this, just 3 different layers of some stone to just kind of help us shape it out. Obviously, it's not going to stay smooth stone like this, but something that I had on me that's a nice clean block that we can use to sort of shape this out a little bit better. I started on this bottom layer by adding a couple blocks of stone jutting out from how the wall had looked initially. And from there, as we went up, I started to add a little bit more. One of the more important details with shaping this out, however, is that you don't want to just throw blocks 1 block out from where the wall was all the way through. Then you're going to end up with these weird stair-step kind of shapes forming, and it's not going to look very natural whatsoever. So you can actually see with the dirt in the wall right here, areas where I did not add any stone that juts out from it, and what that does is it gives us these shapes on each layer where you can kind of see the rock formation in a more natural light, where you get these curves that kind of make their way out and eventually end up forming this curve from the side as well for this overhang that we have. If I were to have put stone on each one of these instances where the wall was before, you end up with the same shape on repeat. You get these harsh lines going into the wall, and it starts to look incredibly man-made and a little jarring on the eyes. So we're doing our best to avoid that. On the second layer, it was a little bit of the same, right? We brought some more out. We had some of the stone that would sit a little bit flush with the last layer. Some of it would come out a little bit further. Some would come out a lot further. And it would be a bit of a blend of all of those different details to arrive where we did. Now, this is a pretty short example of a little cliff face that we got to do right here, so there's not too much more. It just goes up a couple of blocks, and then we're kind of level with the top of the hill right there. So at this point, I think I've shaped it out enough to go grab some dirt and grass blocks for the top of it. And then I'm going to bring a stone cutter over here as well, and I'm going to mix in some stairs and slabs of just this regular stone color throughout, just to kind of shape the place up a little bit. Once I do that, I'll work on a little more of the shading underneath, and I think that'll be good for this little example right here. Well, I've played around with it for a little bit, but if we're being honest, I hate it. And I'm not exactly sure what the right answer is, but I think I don't like it because of how small this area is for us to try and make this cliff face happen. It just doesn't feel like it works. And I think it on its own is fine, but in the bigger picture, that's kind of where the issue arises. I think the detailing we've done in the cliff face works perfectly well. But I think it would work a lot better if it were on one of these longer stretches or in an area that just felt a little more intentional. This just feels weird. I think it has to do with how small of a hill it is that's clipping into the river. So I think I'm going to go ahead and redo this. We're going to tear this down. Maybe not entirely, but I'm going to try the rounded top of the hill and maybe see if we get something a little bit better that way. Sometimes simpler is better, and I think this is a prime case of that exact saying. I think it was just a little bit too much trying to force the issue there with that overhang, and I'm glad we tried it at the very least so that we could see how it turns out. But at the end of the day, this is a good lesson not to be afraid to change something up once you've committed to it, because sometimes the first idea isn't the best idea. I think in hindsight, after having experimented with both examples, this one definitely did a little bit better with a toned down cliff face and just a little bit of a rounded top up there. And I do believe this is going to be where our bridge begins that travels over to the other side anyway. So this will eventually be underneath some sort of bridge up top. I have no idea what we're going to build for it yet. But overall, I think once we start a bridge that kind of connects over here, and this starts to play a little bit of a sort of shaded, hidden underneath part of where the bridge starts, I think that is really going to look good in that case especially. So there's one example of how we are going to dress up the sides of this river here. There is a whole lot more cliff face to do, especially over on this side. And I do think that once we get to this large section right here, this is really where that overhang style can flourish. And I think we can make something that looks pretty cool out of it. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I think we can manage something nicely. We'll get to the rest of these cliff faces in just a minute. But before we do, there's a couple more trees we've got to add to our forest over there. We've got a couple more people who signed up to support over there on Patreon, and that means we've got a couple more trees that we need to build. See, normally this is the kind of thing that I would just scrap and then not even feature in this video at all and go back to the drawing board and try again. But I do think there is some value in keeping this here in the video. I've spent the better part of the past 3 or so hours working on all these cliff sides and trying to come up with what the solution is into the river here. And despite all of the work that I've put in over there and where we're standing down here, I'm just not happy with it. I've tried the rounded hill thing, which looked a little bit better than the overhang, and we even have the overhang over there, and it's on the larger side, that larger continuous wall, but even there, it doesn't really work as good. And at the end of the day, I think I just need to scrap this idea entirely. Not the river itself, but I think we've hit a point where this just isn't going to work. We've kind of run into a wall, and it's time to try something new. Something about having these cliff faces or overhangs over the side of the river just aren't working. It just doesn't really do it for me. It just, I don't know. It feels weird. It feels out of place. I can't quite describe it as much as I would like to be able to, but I honestly think we might be better off if we're just sticking to something a little closer to like what we have here or even where we're standing right now, just a normal, unassuming transition onto the land. And I think a big part of that is going to be having to remove this hill right here so that we can make that work a little bit better. Because I, for the life of me, just cannot come up with a way to make this look good. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes you just don't get it right, but that's all right. No reason not to keep at it. Okay, this go around, I think we actually got something that is serviceable. I basically went throughout and I did what I think I said at first I wasn't going to do, and that was just blend all the terrain with the nearby hills and make it a little more gradual and easy on the eyes. Not only that, but I also went through and bone mealed under here to get a bunch of seagrass, and that helps it look a lot more natural. Again, your focus is not supposed to be on some of these smaller details like the bed of the river, right? Your eye is supposed to be drawn to some of the bigger builds in this world, such as the forest here, or the big tree, the house on the hill, all of these sorts of things, even the bridge that we're going to have going right over where we're sitting right now. All of these things are meant to draw your attention. So as long as at a glance the riverbed passes and doesn't really draw your attention away, it's doing its job. And overall, as we boat through it in that direction and then back out towards the ocean this way, I think we've got something that works really well. I did go ahead and leave this little mini cliffside that we did right there. I thought that was all right, but for the rest of it, just this nice, relaxed hill just works so much better than what I had initially put in place. And again, I think it's a really good lesson on sometimes less is more, and sometimes going a little simpler is not a bad choice at all. And from up here, we get a much better view of the river and all of the changes that we made on it, at least off in this direction. You see how much we've widened it out. There's even this section right here, which gets incredibly wide. And I think that works really well considering the fact that it just empties out into the ocean right as the fog rolls in right there. Now, of course, I mentioned a little earlier, the river does kind of dead end right here, and that'll be a project for later on down the line, specifically when I'm a little better geared for it and I have things like beacons to do that much digging. The good news is I'm not in a rush to be doing any of that at the moment. I really wanted to focus on what was closer to home right here and something that we'd see a little bit more often. So I mentioned it just a little bit earlier, but we of course need a bridge before we're done here. I can't help but feel like it would be a big shame if we went through all of that work to do the river and we didn't even put a bridge across it. Now, I think I have an idea as to how I want to go about doing this bridge, at least what style I want to do it in, and then some of the materials that I want to use. So right here, I've got a little bit of a sneak peek at what we're going to be doing for said bridge. We're going to have some accents using some deep slate and some spruce. That'll kind of make up a lot of kind of the walkway, the floor, and then a little bit of kind of the rail, I guess. And then this will be the bulk of the material that we actually use for the bridge itself, at least the sides, the exterior, all of that sort of stuff. So to give you guys a little bit of an insight into my mindset here, this is kind of what we're going for. Now, on the left side, we have the base palette that's going to cover most of the area, and we've got kind of our lighter block over here with the light gray wool all the way over to a cobblestone, which has a little bit more of those darker hues in it. This will be completely random textured, all mixed together, with just a little sprinkle of this light gray terracotta, which just brings out a little bit more of those reddish hues in a stone palette. Now, I would also usually include something like light gray concrete maybe to get a little more of that as well, but because we're going to be working in and around water, I felt like it was probably best if we just leave that out. And over here on the right, we have our shading palette, so this will be whenever we need to make things a little darker. We have tuff, we have our acacia logs, and then we have smooth basalt. And by smooth basalt, I of course mean polished basalt. Editing Cody here. Quick side note, I don't know why I was showing off polished basalt in this clip when I very clearly was using regular basalt. I have no idea what happened there or why I grabbed those. I realized it after the fact, but anyway, ignore the polished basalt. We're using regular basalt. Carry on. But what these darker colors are going to allow us to do is shade the bridge a little bit down next to the water, especially where the supports of the bridge start to dip underwater. We can really transition into these darker colors to really make the stone look like it's wet, or just that it's been exposed to water for, you know, years or however long the bridge has been here. Just having it get a little darker as it gets towards the water and underwater, I think is going to be a good play. Same can be said for the parts of the stone that will be underneath the bridge, where the sunlight isn't directly hitting it. We'll of course want that to appear a little darker as well, just as one of those light shading techniques that can add a bunch to a build. We of course have been playing around with a lot of shading with our builds so far in this world, and I guess I've only really done one structure so far, but you get the idea. Shading is one of the big things that I'm trying to learn here, and it's also one of the biggest steps that you can take in your builds and improving the quality of them is when you start to use this shading. I've already seen it quite a bit in the things that I've been doing. So now that we know what build style we're going to be going with here and the palette, I hope I've shed some insight on it so that as you see it come together, you can kind of see a little bit of what I've been talking about and how it's implemented, and maybe it'll spark a little something for you as well. So with that said, why don't we build our very first bridge? We can kind of see it a little bit already over the hill, but as we round our little bend in the road right here, a couple of things that you'll notice. First, here's how the bridge is looking off in the distance with our new changes to the river. And secondly, I went ahead and planted a flower down here. I felt like a little lily in the valley would be a perfect little touch for this area, where in a previous episode, we figured out that we had this big beam of light that comes down from the foliage up top, this little gap in the branches of the tree that we built, and I think it is perfectly placed in this little patch of light as one of those nice subtle little touches on the road. Back to the bridge at hand, however, I think we've got something that works pretty well. Now, you might be thinking initially that this doesn't really fit the theme of like the house we built and kind of what we've been doing over here in the fantasy area. And while it could still work for that, this is more in line with what we're going to start seeing over in this direction, over on this part of our world. I've talked about it a number of times at this point, but we're going to have 3 different areas. The first one we've been working on is going to be our fantasy area. We have another one beyond the trees over in that direction, and then our third one is across the river over there. So you can consider this bridge a little sneak peek at the kind of styling that we're going to see a lot of over in this direction. I'm not going to come out and say it quite yet because I have quite the build to launch this area and get everyone introduced to the style that we're going to be going for over in this direction. I'm really excited to get to it, and I felt like the bridge was a nice little tie-in to kind of dip our feet just a little bit in the waters of what we're going to be doing over here. And overall, I think the bridge turned out pretty well. It's probably the best bridge I've ever built, and I have built very few bridges, so it's a pretty low bar to clear. That being said, I do feel like I learned a thing or two about bridge building in here. I was looking at a lot of different inspiration, a lot of art pieces, not even like Minecraft related per se, but just a lot of drawings, and really focusing in on that side of things, just kind of seeing where people's minds go when they're drawing a bridge, when they're creating it from an art perspective. And I tried to take some elements that I was seeing here and there from different bridges, try to merge it together. Obviously, I wanted to style it a certain way in game here. We've got these 2 main supports that come down into the water and kind of these 3 different archways, with of course the main one in the center being where you might boat through. I wanted the bridge to come up far enough above the surface of the water so that you could fit a reasonable enough size boat through. Not that we have boats like that in Minecraft, but you know, just use your imagination a little bit. And another thing I wanted to make sure that I did right was all of the curves here. I wanted to get the shape perfect in everywhere that I could. So a big part of that was of course the archways down below, but another big part of that was the railing here. We used some deep slate for it, a mix of polished deep slate and deep slate bricks. And I used a bunch of slabs and even a little bit of some stairs and walls for kind of these big torches that the campfires represent, as well as some anvils at the very end of it just to kind of tie it into the wall back there. But I went ahead and used that to try and really get this shape up top to sort of accent the rest of the bridge, kind of cap it off, if you will. And I think that alone has done so much for the quality of this build. It really comes across as though the shapes were really well done, and for that I think I'm really proud of this bridge. We'll likely see many more bridges built over the course of this world, but I think that's a really good start. Not to mention, we're starting to fill out our forest just a little bit more over here as more people join up on the Patreon. So shout out to the 3 of you guys who joined this week to start filling out a little bit more of the forest here. As we start to get a couple more layers of trees back here, we're really going to start to have a good look off in this direction. What a bridge. Hello there. Today, I have a grand plan, and that grand plan will involve this here red shulker box. And what might it be that I am putting in this red shulker box? Well, the astute of you might already have an idea, but in one of the previous episodes, we built ourselves a sheep shearing station off in yonder distance. And in that episode, I talked a lot about how I want to approach redstone in this world. That, of course, being that rather than watching tutorials and building other people's farms and contraptions and setups, in this world, I want to take the approach of figuring it out myself myself, while not entirely, because there's only so much you can do without getting some other outside knowledge, but taking the approach of not using tutorials, just taking various bits of knowledge, bits of information, how individual things work, and then piecing them all together so that I can figure out how to get something that works. Now, this does have the side effect of meaning that anything I build is probably super bulky and pretty inefficient. But at the end of the day, it does help you learn a little bit about redstone and figuring things out, problem solving, all of that sort of stuff, and that makes you better long term. It's also just really good for the mind to kind of work through problems like that and get to the bottom of things, and feels pretty rewarding, at least to me. You see a lot of that in building as well, and although it's not really talked about as much with building as it is with redstone, there is still very much a problem-solving element to it, and that rewarding feeling on the other side. Not to mention, the whole trying it makes you better, the more you do, the better you get, all of that sort of stuff you learn as you go. That definitely applies to building. Whoa, hello. Can't believe we were so rudely interrupted. Anyway, you get the idea. Redstone. All right. So it's time to figure out what redstone materials and contraptions and bits and bobs we might need. We need redstone. Time to get mining. All right, we're back. The mining trip successfully done, and we have a ton of redstone that we can play around with here. Okay, I think I've got everything that you would ever need for one redstone box. Now, we are missing slime blocks. That is something that I need to figure out. I need some more sticky pistons as well, but I still don't have a good source of slime balls, and I'm pretty low on things like honey and wheat, so we'll build those up over time. But overall, this feels like a really good box for items that we might use over the course of really anything that we build involving redstone. That, of course, isn't everything that we would build and contraptions that we do. Some of the builds, some of the different contraptions would require unique things, like how we had to use ice and glass over there for our little item flows. Sometimes we'll need some unique items, but I think overall this should cover the basics and really take care of most of the general need whenever we need to just grab something real quick. This should do the trick, I do believe, and it did take a little bit of caving to get all the redstone that I needed, and it unfortunately was very expensive, but I do think it'll be worth it, especially with how much I have planned to do in this episode alone. So we've got all this talk about redstone, but you're probably wondering what the first thing I have in mind is. Well, great question. We're gonna head on over here to where we have our sheep set up, and a little bit further beyond even still. So as we've previously shown off, we've got our house and our forest over there, and of course that forest is going to divide the fantasy area of the world with the mystery area that will be over in this direction. Mystery area in terms of the theme at the very least. We've of course already built one thing here, the sheep farm, which is going to have a building put up around it at some point in the future, but we're not quite ready to tackle the builds out here yet, but I do need the productivity. We do need the farms. So the next thing I have in mind, make sure a horse of course doesn't wander off too far, the next thing I have in mind is a moss farm. I know what you're probably thinking, a moss farm in a world where I said I wasn't going to watch any tutorials and just kind of figure it out? Well, yeah, I've built like one time ever. So how bad could it go? Okay, so the first thing that I need to confirm is how to make a stone generator, a smooth stone generator, because that is how all moss farms that I know of at least operate. So we have our little test trench down here. I'm just going to put a little bit of flowing lava because off the top of my head, I think you get smooth stone when flowing water hits flowing lava. And so we are going to give that a test right here. Cobblestone. Okay, next test is what happens when flowing lava hits still water. That's probably, that might be a little too close to that one, but maybe if we do this one right here. Still cobblestone. Not a problem. I will just put this lava right here. There it is. Flowing lava hits still water. I actually knew that the whole time. I was just testing you, of course. So with that confirmed and out of the way, we know how we can start our contraption here. And I have a bunch of these trapdoors on me as well. Birch mostly because that's what I had the most of, but I don't think it'll matter. I think we can use the trapdoors to kind of control the on-off of the farm, and, well, stone generator that then controls the rest of it. All right, so I've gone ahead and moved us up into the air a little bit just so we have a lot more room to work with, and I don't need to worry about all of the terrain getting in the way. And I'm starting at the bottom here with what I believe is going to be the water flow for the very first of our modules. I think we'll probably end up doing a couple different modules so that we can be a little more efficient with how we do this. But I'm thinking off the start, I'm probably going to have some water flowing in on either side from there and over here. And I could probably do a bigger module than this, but for now, I think we're just going to roll with it as is. So the mindset is basically this. This is going to be where our stone forms on these 3 pistons and these 3 pistons. And once the stone is formed, these are going to push the stone that's going to be on this level up 1 level. We're going to have some pistons that are here. And these pistons are then going to push it over to where we start kind of having the moss break apart, and then it gets sent, you know, further from there. So what we need to do here is figure out how we're going to have the lava come down. I think we're going to have it 1 block above this layer of pistons here, and then it will trickle down and then go down again. And once it goes down again, it's going to form the stone on this level, which is going to kind of cancel out the lava, I think. And then we'll be able to set up the redstone so that this goes off to push it up. Shortly thereafter, this goes off to push it to the side, and then from there we can kind of figure out some of the other details. All right, so I've gone ahead and set up our redstone right here. I've got the pistons pushed out with the lava flowing over, and that way we could suspend it. Now, down below, I've also hooked up some redstone to go into the side of these pistons down here where the water is flowing to be ready to push it up. And now we can see once we retract these pistons, hopefully the lava will fall down and form stone like we were talking about. And sure enough, there we have it. I was thinking the stone was going to be up here. I think I explained that wrong before. The stone forms down here, and I think because we have water to the side where there's no lava, it's separated by glass, that makes sure that the water is ready to continue flowing once the pistons push the stone out of the way. So in the very manual kind of example right here, the next thing that we would want to do is flip a lever. I don't have a lever, so we're just going to go and use a redstone torch. We're going to activate these pistons on the bottom to push the stone up. Now, when we do that, and we can go ahead and get rid of it, the pistons go back down. The water continues to flow that way, right? So now we've got stone in the middle, and that suspends the lava up top because it's still another block out. So if we then take the next lever up top, this will do 2 things in theory. It'll push the stone that way, and it will also allow the lava to fall down and form another row of stone as soon as I retract it. So if we do that, it looks like I had some glass down there that I didn't need to have. But we wouldn't have that in the final design. And then we retract it again. I think we'll get back to having stone. And as long as there's no cobblestone, that's good, because that means something went wrong and we broke it. But I think we've got it good. So now I can do this cycle a couple times over just to make sure that as it goes, it's going to work appropriately. As we, you know, just cycle the machine as if it were on like a timer or so, just a couple attempts. And just like that, we've got 3 layers, and the stone is continuing to form. The only thing we need to do now is get this on a timer and sleep. And once we get it onto a timer, that means all of this should run smoothly. Now, obviously, we don't want this to just continue on forever, and we're going to actually have a proper platform right here where we have the moss set up with it getting bone mealed, and then we want something to stop the stone at a certain point. Because how moss farms work, as far as I know, is it's all based on pushing stone when it can't really be pushed any further, and if there's moss in the way, it just breaks the moss apart. That's the premise that we're working with. So we'll build a little platform right here. The middle is going to remain untouched, and that way, when we have the moss in the middle that gets bone mealed, we never have to worry about that disappearing. Obviously, you want one stationary block so that the bone meal never tries to bone meal stone, because then you've broken it. So that'll ensure that it can continue to run long term. So now that we got the first step done, let me go ahead and get a platform built here, and we'll see if we can't get the next step working. Platform set up, and I think we're ready for a couple of different things here. So for one, I went ahead and walled it off with some glass. I think we're going to be using a lot of glass in this build, just as a nice transparent block to be able to see everything I'm doing, especially given this isn't really my strength, being able to see what goes wrong and when it goes wrong will probably be pretty helpful. Anyways, here's what's going to happen. We have our moss block right here. We're just going to test this manually for now. We're going to have the water flow from up on this shelf right here, and ideally it pushes all of the items over here where I've got a bunch of signs. Now, I don't know if it's just the signs or if I do stone on one other end, but one of the combinations, I think, means that the stone won't go any further and it'll just break apart the moss. We're going to test this. I might need to do like furnaces or obsidian or something at the lip of it because those are immovable blocks. So maybe it'll come to that. I just feel like this is something that I've seen done before in a couple iterations. So we're just going to send it. And of course, what this allows us to do is mirror this exact setup over on this side as well so that we could have 2 of them right here. And then tile these over again, right? We could have 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, like however many that we want to do for the moss farm right here. Which, by the way, could also potentially act as a bone meal farm for us as well if we want to get really crazy with our item routing. But for now, let's just try and get the functionality down at a baseline. So for starters, give me those trapdoors. We're going to put all of these right here. These are going to be facing this way in line with the same block that they're in so that they can be waterlogged but not flowing outward, at least when they're in the up position. So we've got our water here. We're just going to go ahead and water source these up by placing them on every other block. Now we do need to power these, so I'm actually thinking there's a bit of an oversight here. I might replace this glass right here with maybe like some of our wool blocks that we're using for redstone. That way I can send a signal into the block that will then power the next block over, which would be this trapdoor. I think we can do that. And I know glass doesn't carry a redstone signal, so we're going to need to swap these out. Stop typing that comment. I know I just said I would use wool, and there's lava right there. Don't worry, I won't use wool. It's okay. I'm going to use birch wood instead. Okay, so I've got the water in place. We've got our redstone set up. We got a temporary little lever right here to, in theory, be able to undo the trapdoors and let the water flow freely. So if we do that, they're on. And then when we flick it off, trapdoors go down, except for this guy, which isn't powered. But you know what? That's totally fine. We have this gap in the middle. It doesn't seem to affect the water flow at all. And we could probably even get rid of this guy entirely and just throw another piece of glass right there for consistency. If we do that, that'll bring all of the trapdoors back up. That's good. Flip it again. The water goes down. Now, this is something that I'm probably going to want to take a look at. We may want to, for one, extend this platform by 1 block so that the water doesn't flow past it. Maybe 2. I don't think we can get away with 2. I don't know how far pistons can push blocks, but we're going to have to play around with that just a little bit here. So let's flip those trapdoors back up. By the looks of it, we no longer get 1 block of coverage, so I will go ahead and replace this trapdoor right here. And I think even though this trapdoor doesn't flip because it's waterlogged and it connects, does it still reach as far? Nope, I am totally wrong. So I think in this case, up top specifically, we will go ahead and swap this glass out for stone so that we can power this just the same as all the rest of it. And that way we can, at the very least, make sure that all of the water reaches a consistent distance all the way out to the edge. Now to figure out the distance that we want. All right, attempt number 1. I've layered up 2 layers of signs right here, 1 up top for the water flow to stop at a block early, and I've extended the platform that we're on by 1 block as well. So this is what it's looking like right here, a real healthy square shape, and the water does want to reach all the way out to here, but I think with that layer of signs, it should, in theory, stop the water from going any further. Yes, it does. Okay, so all the items could fall down in the middle right here. This prevents the water from going any further. Now we can really get to the juicy part of the test right here, which is to bone meal this moss and see if we have done it effectively. So, manual test for now. Again, we'll automate this later on as we go. But let's say this receives bone meal. It covers pretty much most of this area, which is really nice. Now, the next thing that needs to happen is that we need to generate, or actually, I guess we have some stone generated. So we need to push this from the bottom up. I do have some more levers. So we're going to flick this up. And, oh, we can't do that because those arms are extended. Whoops. I'm going to undo this piston right here. Those are all down and waiting in their normal position. Now we push this up and return those so the water continues to flow. Now we push over, and let me see if I can get a better view of this once I flick this lever right here. We do that and undo it, and we had a couple things break, so we can hear the stone go off once more. Okay, we're gonna run this a couple different times. So back up, water flows, back out, lava flows, okay, back up, water flows, and then over, lava flows, gets us our stone. How are we looking? Obviously, we don't have a collection system. So you can see right here, all of this moss is getting kicked up because it's breaking away all of these pieces of moss, and we haven't gone to where the signs are. So this technique with the signs appears to stop all of the stone from moving too far. We go up again, and over again, and up again, and over again. Trying to keep up with the pace of the lava flow is really kind of what dictates it at the end of the day. Let's say we do all of that, and then we time it to where the water flow comes in. So we do that. It doesn't even need to be much at all. That pushes everything off of the platform, goes back in here. Part of the timing would, of course, be to bone meal this again. So that would get more bone meal. The process would rinse and repeat, and then we have some moss output. So now I think we've done the hard part. There is a little bit more that's going to be tricky. We need to route bone meal into a dispenser that's looking at this block from above so that it can continue to be bone mealed on the timer. And then, of course, we do have the timers to worry about as well, which will surely be really easy and prove not at all difficult for me. So let me work on getting something figured out here. As a matter of fact, here's what we're going to do. I think I'm going to tile this in reverse on this side right here. I'm just going to mirror it so that we have two of them to work with. I need to then figure out a little bit of the timing down here. I think I want to get all of this timing figured out before I worry about the item output, which will also be the bone meal input. We're going to kind of split the items so that some of it goes to composters and bone meal, and that bone meal can feed back into the system so that it can infinitely feed into itself and we don't need to supply it. But all of that's going to come after. For now, let me get a mirrored version of this, and then let me see if I can't figure out some timing for the redstone on these three things that we've set up so far. Okay, I haven't mirrored it over there yet, but I've been playing around a little bit with trying to get the timing, and well, I guess at least wiring it up. I haven't experimented with the timing. We're about to for the very first time. I figured we would do a little something like this to get a signal. We've just got an observer and a sticky piston, so when this gets pushed out, it ticks because it observes that it got pushed. That's going to send a signal both that way to get all of our stuff over there, and then this way to go up to the next floor to get those as well. Now, I might need a little bit of a delay, like here, for example. Maybe I'll put that on 4. Maybe I'll need more than that. We're going to play around with it and see. Hopefully nothing breaks too poorly, but we have our general on-off switch right here. So, moment of truth, we're going to give this a go as nighttime approaches. That pushes those. Okay, it's pushing a little too fast where the lava is, but nothing is broken so far. So let me turn that off real quick. Sleep. And now we're going to give it another go. So I didn't want to do this while it was running. I felt like I might break it. So if I give this another 4-tick delay, let's see how this works. If we turn that back on, we've got that operating. Is it getting... No, the top ones are still... Oh, cobblestone. Uh-oh. Something went wrong. Uh-oh. Alright, I've looked around for a little bit, and I want to say that we're probably fine without messing with things like this down here, and even this up here. I think we're overcomplicating it, because I think if we just get everything down here on our timing loop right, it should be good. I just need to rearrange how we're doing all of this, I think. So let me take a look at maybe reconfiguring what we have set up here and try and get something better. All right, it's looking pretty different at this point. I've gone ahead and rearranged most of what we're looking at right here, just centered around the timer more than anything. And then from there, we have it route directly into those bottom pistons, which will push where the water is, push the stone up. and then it eventually makes its way up and around, and then this, of course, is what controls the over, or where the lava is itself. So, I'm not sure if this is going to make too much of a difference, and if it does, how much of a difference, but we're going to give this a go. I don't have any weird timings on any of the other two. It's all pretty consistent as soon as it starts with this bottom one right here. So, I'm going to flick the lever, and we're going to see how this goes when we run the system. We've got lava coming down. We got a couple pieces of stone, and... okay, something went wrong. This did not retract, so it only went once, and then the signal did not loop. I've done something wrong here where the signal doesn't want to loop, and I'm not sure what it is. It could be something to do with this right here. Okay, I've just moved it over one block. I moved the off switch to here, and that way the repeater goes into the block and then to the torch in the redstone dust. Maybe that will make a difference. I couldn't explain how or why, but I feel like I had it kind of more similar to this before, so I think we give this a go as it is now. Okay, everything fixed down here. Now let me go up top. We are going to re-bone meal what we have up here, and I think this is where we're going to sit next. Now that we have that all bone mealed, I'm going to turn this on again, and instead of watching what's going on down there, we're going to go ahead and just keep an eye up here to make sure everything seems to be moving smoothly, and if anything seems to be broken. Okay, so watching from right here should give us a pretty good angle, I think. I can see both sides moving. There doesn't appear to be any cobblestone at the moment. We know that the moss is breaking apart. We can go ahead and say that it would bone meal again and let it run its course a little bit more. Well, we had a little bit of a recording scuff there. One of the clips that I was doing got a little corrupted, but you didn't miss too much. We had seen how the stone generator was working correctly. We had the timing down, and I had continued to test that until I was absolutely certain that it was working correctly. At that point, we were safe to go ahead and mirror it over to this side, and then I added 2 more for a total of 4 individual areas right here that we can have going at once. I don't think any more than 4 will be necessary, but if the day comes where we just can't produce enough moss or bone meal from this, then we can go ahead and add more onto the end of it, probably off in that direction. But I think for now, we're probably good. So alongside getting all the other nodes done for the moss farm here, I also had to wire up the whole thing. I had to get everything all connected to the front interface right here, and I'll kind of show you a little bit of what we did. So we have our original timer right here, and that wires all the way down to our master on-off switch. Now that original timer is pretty much how you just saw it a moment ago. I went ahead and just connected the line right here where it starts to power. It'll shoot off in that direction, power everything over there, and then I have this line going this way, and that'll power everything over on that side. Now that is, of course, only going to be the pistons down below and the pistons up here, and the timing of those will be as they need to be, not too fast, not too slow, to allow the stone gen to work without forming any cobblestone or messing anything else up. Now, you probably noticed that I have a second timer right here. Now, this timer is also set up to the master on-off switch down there. And I basically mirrored what I did over here, except I extended it. I made it a little bit bigger, and that's because this is for the trap doors up top. So this powers both this side and the other side, all from this one timer. And that'll be the trapdoors in a way that the water can flow out, and we have enough time in between the water flowing out and receding back in to where the bone meal can go off. So you're probably wondering what it looks like when the whole thing is on. Well, I can go ahead and show you. Now, we don't have the bone meal wired up at the moment, so I'll just go ahead and bone meal each area one time, and then I'll turn the machine on for a little bit, and you guys can see how it runs when it's doing its thing. All of the bone meal and the item tracks and everything like that, that's the next part that we got to figure out. But for now, let's see how this looks after we sleep, of course. Much better. All right, let's get this thing kicked on, and you guys can see what it looks like. All right, so here it is working as intended. We've got all 4 stone generators pushing the moss out. The water comes in every so often to push all of the moss down the middle right here. And eventually it gets to a point where we've just got the one central line of moss and everything else has been dissipated. All right, machines turned off, and now we can get focusing on the next part of this, which will be a combination of a couple things. All of our moss ends up down here in the center. So we're going to want a water stream that carries all of the items over to this side. More than likely, we'll bring it up. And then once it's up top, we need to figure out what we want to do with all of that moss. Part of it, we want to go into composters that feed into bone meal, that feed back into the system here. But it wouldn't be a moss farm if we weren't farming moss at the end of the day. So we also need to split a number of the moss items into their own offshoot, and that'll be kind of the profit, if you will, of this whole system. So we'll need to figure out a way to get the moss items to only partially be pulled into composters and then fed into these dispensers, and then have some of it also continue on to the profit storage. We will also then need to wire up some timing for the bone meal dispensers here, and we might do the timing based on the trapdoor line that we have over here. I know some of you guys have been waiting for quite a while for me to see it. I see it. You cannot bone meal from an entire block away with the dispenser looking down. I get it. I finally see it. I'm much further along. I'll get to this in a little bit. Yes, I know you cannot bone meal that, which means we're going to have to do this, which will still extend out here. But what this also means is that all of this gap right here in each of these nodes was for nothing, and we can actually have this entire platform work. So, time to change up all of that. So I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is that I've got the whole thing built. Now, yes, for all of you guys who are very redstone inclined, you will be very quick to point out how bulky and probably inefficient all of this is, but this is how I was able to make it work in my head. And at the end of the day, it does do the job. So, of course, where we last left off, you guys saw that all of this was working, right? We got the stone generator, and I don't know why there's cobblestone. Just ignore that. Act like that never happened. And I'm just going to replace that with moss real quick. Anyway, it's totally working 100% of the time without any issues. And after we got that done, the next goal was to get the item flows. So the item flows I got working. They go all the way up there and they swoop around. And this is where it gets a little more interesting. So to feed bone meal back into the system so that it can try and recoup itself, I did some item filters up here, which I've been playing around a little bit with on like what I put in there. Right now, I've got moss blocks in all 4. Now, originally, I had it mixed up between azalea, flowering azalea. I had one for moss carpets, and I had one for seeds. Now, moss carpets and seeds don't do hardly anything in the composter for bone meal, so those really weren't worth it. And then for the actual azalea bushes, you just don't get enough of them for it to recoup the bone meal loss. So that left me with moss blocks on all 4 of these. The problem with that is that I think for it to be really effective, the machine would have to run for quite a while at a time so that these hoppers can get chock full of moss blocks, and then you would have some extra finally flowing into storage over here. So there's a little bit of an efficiency problem in that we're not able to recoup the bone meal that we're using, even when it's moss blocks. We're like barely breaking even, if that, and so I'm really unsure as to where to go from here in the realm of hoping that we could use this farm to feed into itself fuel-wise. I can't help but feel like we're just gonna have to spend bone meal that we get from like the skeleton farm or places like that, and this just isn't gonna work as I had originally intended. But again, I'm not the best at redstone. Some of you guys might have the solution. You might know a little bit more about moss farms to be able to kind of give me some information as to what I'm missing, what I'm not thinking of, or how I could make it a little more efficient. Regardless, everything that goes beyond this point, which at this point is everything except moss blocks until they get chocked full enough, will end up down here into a couple item sorters. This would sort out the moss, any profit that we get, And then over here, we have 2 hoppers that's going to pick up everything else and turn it into excess bone meal. So the reason I have a cake here is that way items can be pulled into either of these 2 hoppers. The water will push it into the cake, and then if this hopper can't pick it up because there's too many items, it'll go into this hopper right here. I tried like a chest, and that really wasn't working hitbox-wise to get anything into that hopper, but a cake seemed to do the trick, and I do remember my good friend Hoof using cakes on hoppers with water streams. So I figured why not. As for the last little bit of this right here, where we've got the item sorters and then the composters, this part I'm happy with. It works fine. It's doing its trick as intended, so no issues there at the very least. And then I think the bulkiest part of this whole ordeal is what I have going on for the bone mealing and breaking of everything on top of the moss block. So let me try and explain this in a way that hopefully makes a little bit of sense. So as the trap door line goes off, that's this redstone line right here, as it sends the water stream off, it'll hit the target block, and this is repeated on all 4 nodes. It'll hit the target block with the inverted torch, and that will send the signal up here. Now, one signal gets very delayed as it makes its way all the way over to the target block, which then bone meals the moss that we are standing on at the moment. The other line, when this observer reads that the signal has come through, it's on a little bit of a different timing, and this one will go to the piston, which pushes off any grass, azalea bushes, or carpets that are on top of this block. And the reason you have to have the piston there is because apparently you can't bone meal moss if there's something on top of the block. Not even a moss carpet, not a strand of grass. You can't have anything on there. And that was giving me so many fits for so long until I had finally decided to try breaking what was on top of it and then testing. And that's when I realized that you can't have anything on top. So I went through many phases of trying to put things on here, but you can't do torches, you can't do chains, you can't do anything on top of here. It's got to be air. And so that left me with pistons to break whatever is in there. Luckily, that does work. And so I just had to repeat this on all 4 sides. Problem being, the timing is a little inconsistent, being that all of this comes from 1 clock at the very start. And so some of these timings had to be a little bit longer to account for it. Some of them had to be a little different than the last one. And so it's not perfectly tiled. It's not like a repeatable design that I could do, but it is a design that works. And I do have the timing to a point where it at least functions without breaking. We did just see a minute ago as well that I no longer needed to have that gap in the middle once I realized that I had to elevate the moss anyway, so I went ahead and fixed that. Now all of these stone platforms are a perfect 7 blocks without any weirdness in the middle. And that really sums up the bulk of the farm. I did have to do a little bit of adding some stone underneath just to make sure that none of the moss fell below the entire contraption, but I do think contraption is a great word for what we have right here. This is one of the craziest things that I have ever tried to tackle, and I know that it's taken most of this episode just to get to this point, but at the end of the day, I'm a builder, I'm not a redstoner, so for me to be able to tackle this without a tutorial, it was going to take me all week. It was bound to happen, and you know what? I did all right. If the definition of all right means it works, but not entirely as intended, then I think we did pretty good. So please let me know how I fix the efficiency, or are we doomed to just feed bone meal in manually? And I guess if that's the case, I can at least get rid of a lot of the stuff that we have going on right behind me here and make it look a little nicer. Either way, let me know, redstoners out there, let me know, how do I make this work better to fuel itself? Well, moss farm down, at least partially, and I think that's going to cover it for today. Now, we didn't get around to building anything aesthetic or kind of in the line of what we've been focusing on in the episodes up to this point, but a big reason for that is that we really need to hammer home some of these other things like collecting moss and even doing some other smaller things that'll be a little easier, like a setup for mud and glow lichen and all of these other little things, like a spot to make concrete easier and maybe a dedicated area to farm some trees, all of that kind of stuff. As we build those up, it'll be a little easier to focus more on builds and a little less on some of this functionality, but I think it is still valuable at the end of the day to kind of play around with some of this stuff and learn a little bit more about redstone and farm making. Not to mention, I've been working on a really big project, and I'm hoping that I can get it out by next week. We'll see how everything goes, but I've been kind of building up towards that, and I think once you see it, you'll kind of understand why there was a little bit of a slowdown in exactly what we were building and how much we were getting done. As always, I want to say a big shout out to everyone who supports the content over on Patreon. It's thanks to you guys that I can put these episodes out every week and also have time to stream and do all of this full time. So big shout out to you guys. You make it possible. If you're watching this the day of or day after it releases, we'll be live on Twitch this Friday from this world, working on a little bit of the behind the scenes here. So definitely come join us over there. As of the time of recording this, we just did our first creator collab for this series. We worked on some building with Infinite Drift and put together something that'll make its way into this world in a future episode. Excited to get around to that at some point as well. That's all from me for now. So until next week, I hope I left you feeling just a little bit inspired.